right, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. We're so excited to have you here for Halfway There. I'd like to start by introducing myself and my co-organizers. I'm Lauren Locklear. I'm an assistant professor at Texas Tech University, and Edwina Hill and Ben Rogers, also assistant professors at South Carolina and Boston College, are here with us today. And one of our co-organizers, Bailey Bigelow at the University of Utah, couldn't be here today. She's on maternity leave, but definitely here in spirit. We're so excited to have all of you here, like I said, for our 17th annual Halfway There PDW. But what's unique about this year's PDW is that it's our first time ever being in a virtual setting. So although, like I said, we've done this for a long time, this is a new format for us. So we're really interested in hearing what you guys think about this. At the end, we have a little survey for you guys. Although this is a different format, the content is largely the same and the goals of this session are largely the same. We're interested in hearing about how you guys can transition from this first half stage of the doctoral program to the second half where you're dissertating, you're growing your scholarly identity, and just figuring out what it means to be an academic in OB. I also want you guys to think about the takeaway here being that there are many paths to success in our career, and really only you can define what that success means. You might hear some feedback that resonates well with you, and other feedback and advice that you might not think defines your vision of success. And so at Halfway There, we don't want to tell you there's a one size fits all version of success, because as you'll hear today, there's lots of ways to craft your scholarly identity and to have scholarly impact. So finally, just for some housekeeping, we want to encourage you guys, if you're able to have cameras on, be engaged. After each of our speakers, we will have time for a Q&A. So if you're brave, you're welcome to raise your hand and we can call on you to open up our Q&A and do a live question. But if you would like to put those in the chat, we'll also be monitoring that chat as well. And one of our hosts will read those questions out for our speakers. So with that being said, I am going to introduce our first speakers. We have Anthony Klotz and Mark Bolino here to talk about crafting your scholarly identity and building scholarly impact. So Anthony Klotz is a professor at the University College London School of Management. And you may know him as someone who studies turnover and resignation because he coined the term the Great Resignation. Mark Bolino is the David L. Boren Professor of Management at the University of Oklahoma. And for those that don't know, he was also Anthony's dissertation chair and advisor. So we have a unique fireside chat for you guys today between these two. Mark studies citizenship behavior, impression management, and psychological contracts. So Anthony and Mark will be hosting a podcast episode for us today, a little fireside chat, and we're lucky to be the live audience for this session. They're going to tell us about crafting scholarly identity and what it means to have scholarly impact. And each of them have taken fairly unique routes to scholarly identity and impact. So we're really grateful for them to be here today. Thank you both. I am going to stop sharing and spotlight you and turn it over to you guys.
Thanks, Lauren. Appreciate it. Yeah, welcome everybody. Thanks for being here. We're looking forward to having a lively conversation and answering any questions that you have at the end, but I think we'll just dive right into it and kick it off by me asking Mark the question, the big question, right? How do you define and develop a research identity?
Okay, let me, this is a difficult question, and I just want to reiterate what Lauren said about there being a lot of different ways to develop your research identity, define who you are. And I would also say that some of that process is going to be driven by you and the choices you make. And then some of that process is going to be driven by things that are sort of out of your control, in the sense that you may not know exactly which papers of yours are going to have an impact or that people are going to associate with you the most, or where you're always hoping to kind of come up with something interesting that people will talk about, but you're not always able to predict what that would be. And so I guess there are some things that I think that I have tried to do in shaping my identity that I can recommend, but then some of this again is sort of out of your control. And I guess one of the things that I would say is that if you want to have a research identity, you have to sort of focus on certain areas. And you kind of have to stick with an area. Like I do a lot of work on citizenship behavior. I've spent, more than 25 years really working on the topic of citizenship. I've heard some people, including Anthony, say that it can be boring to keep working on a topic like citizenship. Um, but I don't find it boring. I like it. And I think because I've stuck with it for so many years, that's contributed to my identity. And I've also done a lot of stuff that sort of emphasizes the dark side or the negatives associated with citizenship. And so as it has happened, um, I've kind of become identified with that for better or worse. Sometimes I like citizenship. I think citizenship is important. So the idea that I'm sort of sometimes seen as a negative person or like Darth Vader, the dark side, is not always the image I'm hoping to project. But again, like I said, at some point you don't always have total control of your identity. So, another thing that I've done is I publish a lot of papers in sort of adjacent areas related to citizenship, like pro-social behavior, proactive behavior. And so, I try and, stay active in those areas and sort of build on some of the work that I've done that's already existing. And then if you have the opportunity to sort of do different types of work, maybe some empirical work, some conceptual work, some review work, then you can kind of build this portfolio that sort of helps you have this identity. But it's something that takes many, many years. When you start off, you're not gonna, I don't think people are gonna expect that you have a really strong identity. But maybe you have some guesses about the things that are interesting to you. So I'll leave it there and let Anthony maybe chime in or probe if he wants to, or give his take.
Yeah, I can share my perspective, and yeah, not surprisingly, it overlaps to some degree. But I think those of you on the call, right, are at the end of year two, maybe the end of year three, right in the middle, and it's very normal for this to be a pretty hazy, messy time for scholarly identity, for research identity, and it sort of looms out there that you need to figure it out. But I would just say it's very normal at your stage to not know and to be a bit confused about it, because you're coming off of a couple of years of your seminars where you've learned about the whole OBHR domain. At the same time, you've worked with some faculty, but not all faculty yet, maybe not even the faculty that you really want to work with. When I was in your shoes, I was only starting to work with Mark, and I'd worked with other faculty in different areas a few years prior. And so I was probably pretty scrambled when I was in your shoes, and I think that's normal. But I would be paying attention to what ideas and areas are exciting you. And so if you think back to the seminars that you've had over the last few years, were there any topics that really sort of ignited your intrinsic motivation? As you're working with faculty, you're figuring out which areas you really like and maybe don't like. And that doesn't mean that if you're working with faculty in an area that you don't like, that you don't work on that. That doesn't, it's not really realistic, and not a good strategy from a number of perspectives. But just being present in this like sorting out phase and making note of what excites you and what doesn't excite you. And the other last thing I'll say, or another thing I'll say, is thinking about right now, you don't need to figure out your research identity for the next 40 years. I would really be focused on the next 3 to 5 years as you're sort of sorting out what identity you want to have. And it may end up being your identity for a long time, but I'm sort of when I have, and I'll talk about this, like probably 3 different buckets that I work in. I don't have nearly as clear of an identity, research identity as Mark does. And that's partly because I have wide interests and I get curious in a lot of different areas, and maybe it's a little lack of discipline too. I'm not sure, but that's really worked well for me. And I can trace those 3 areas where those ideas came from back to when I was sitting in your shoes. Of course, at the time, I didn't know it would map out the way that it did over the next decade. But I would just say right now, be present and really make notes about what's working for you and what's not working for you in terms of ideas, methods, approaches, and so forth.
Yeah, just want to add on that because I think finding something that you really like and that you're really interested in is much more important than finding something that you think is going to be a hot topic or maybe even something that is something that all of your faculty are working on. And I know that that might be sort of controversial advice for me to give, but I don't want you to feel, I don't think students should feel totally constrained by focusing on topics that their advisor or that faculty members are working on. If you're really passionate about it, I think you should go ahead and try and work on that. Maybe you have to do kind of both, and maybe you can do some of these things on your own. I also think that taking ownership of a literature, of a research topic is something that helps you, establish that sort of identity. Obviously, that's hard to do at an early stage in your career, but it's also not impossible. You can ask faculty for opportunities to lead certain projects. Anthony did his dissertation on resignations. I had zero I thought that it was a great topic, but I was skeptical that I thought for sure someone had done this topic. And when he said he wanted to do his dissertation on the topic, I said, well, Anthony, I don't know anything about this topic. It's not in my area, which means you're going to have to take more ownership over it, than if you did something related to citizenship or impression management. And he did, and I think that's also helped shape his identity.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think part of it has to do with being comfortable taking that sort of risk if it's an area that interests you. And at the same time, I don't think, yeah, Mark, I mean, you were super supportive at the same, at first you said, let me look into it because I bet somebody's done this before, and looked into it and then came back and we're like, I'm surprised, but it doesn't seem to be out there. So I'm open to doing this, but here are sort of the benefits and risks for you of taking this path. And so being able to go into it eyes wide open was pretty critical. Should we move on to the next question?
Sure. I'll go ahead and hit on the second topic that was mentioned, which is, how do you balance authenticity with sort of strategy in building a scholarly profile? Where's sort of that line between being authentic and strategic?
Yeah, no, this is a good question, and I think authenticity comes up a number of times because we're sort of sorting out who we are and where are the boundaries of our research profile, our scholarly identity, and those can be hard to determine. And so just again, realizing that this is a sense-making process, that the most senior people in the field have gone through the same sorting out process of who I am. And it's something that changes over time, right? And when you go up for tenure, when you switch jobs, you'll revisit your scholarly identity and say, is this still accurate? And you'll probably tweak it a little bit because your profile has changed over time. So this is something that's ongoing for a long time. In terms of authenticity and strategy, I would think about, some of you probably do work in areas of different levels of construal. So like zooming out and thinking of your research at a very high level, and then zooming into a lower level and thinking about like specifically what I'm interested in. And I think through doing that, you can start to get some good boundaries around what you're really working in. I think when I was in in your shoes, I was very much at a low construal level, and here's kind of the small topics that I'm interested in. And since then, I've gotten better at zooming out a little bit more and saying, like, really what I'm interested in is employees' relationships with work. And I study that through the lens of these three more specific areas. And so I think that can be helpful to zoom out and say, am I really just at a high level, I'm interested in what leads to employee well-being. At a high level, I'm interested in these transactions that happen that often involve trust or whatever it may be. And I think that's a way that you can talk about your identity in a very big way, and in a way that when you get in a meeting with the dean, they understand it. When you're explaining it to your grandma what you do in school, you can talk about it at this high level, and it makes sense. But it's also true to who you are, and you're not stretching yourself, because you're also saying, I do this through the lens of these three specific areas, and that may not always align perfectly, but I think that's a helpful exercise. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I agree with all of that. And Anthony and I see eye to eye on a lot of these issues, I think. But one thing I'll add is I don't think it's inauthentic to be working on projects that don't really drive, that aren't your passion. And there may be projects that you don't even enjoy working on, but they're going to be useful to you in your career. Or there may be things that don't fit with your scholarly profile that are just interesting to you. Like Anthony came to me, probably many years ago, actually, although it took a while to get the paper together, about, some ideas about biophilia and nature and contact with nature. You know, that is not a thing that is, something that's super interesting to me, a priori that I had been thinking about. But when I heard the topic, I said, this is an awesome topic. This is something I want to work on. And so not every project you work on has to sort of fit with this, scholarly profile. You can be authentic in the sense that you're working on things that interest you, whether they're aligned with your scholarly profile or not. And I have several papers that I've done over the course of my career where it's like, I worked on that just because I was interested in the topic, or I saw a good opportunity. And so I don't think that is a sign of inauthenticity. I would be more concerned if you're working on too many projects where you don't feel passionate about it, because I presume most of you went into this career because you're interested in learning about behavior in organizations at some, at some level or some aspect of it. And so you want to find those topics that are interesting to you. And I think that goes back to kind of my earlier point. It's a lot easier when you find those topics because you are passionate about them and you don't mind working on them over the years because you see value in that topic, right? So I think there's lots of questions that are unanswered about citizenship, which is a very old literature now. I still see a lot of relevant questions. And so I think if you pick something that you're genuinely interested in, you'll continue to see those sorts of things.
Yeah, and picking up, I think that's a great point, and hopefully, just to reiterate, like you're all interested in org psych broadly defined, or something around there, and so I don't think. I think there is this issue of how we strategically present ourselves, because we need to do some impression management on the job market. But I've never worried too much about being inauthentic, as long as the project that I'm working on is somewhere in the domain of employees and the world of work. And yeah, then the other thing I'll say, and maybe we'll get into this more later, is authenticity with strategy. Once you get on the job market or go to the job market, you're going to see that schools have a wide range in how much they care about you having a clear research profile. And so where I started out at the wonderful Oregon State University, that there wasn't any questions about research profile. It was a place where you do the work you're interested in. Hopefully that has a good output in terms of pubs and scholarly impact and social impact. But in terms of a profile, they didn't really care about it. And I'll talk about interviewing here at UCL. It's very, very, very highly valued. And so it'll also come down to how strategic you need to be will also depend on the institution that you're talking to. And I say that just to give you a sense of how, we kind of accordion or change how much we need to make sense of our research identity depending on the situation.
Yeah, and as somebody who's hired multiple new faculty, junior faculty in the past couple of years, I'll tell you personally, I don't expect people who are applying for jobs at our university to have a, solidified scholarly profile. Even when they go up for tenure, it's, you'll read their research statements and obviously you want to be able to tell some sort of a compelling story. But I don't put even a whole lot of stock in that at that phase. I think maybe more when you're going up for full, you might expect some more a stronger narrative about your scholarly profile. But yeah, I think at your stage, I wouldn't be so worried about that. And I'd also, and I think Anthony said this before, but I'll just reiterate it, take some time to figure out what's really interesting to you. I mean, I do think the earlier you can identify something that you're passionate about, it gives you a little bit of an advantage. But that doesn't always happen. And so that's completely natural. And I don't think you need to force yourself to say, I've got to try and identify, as a scholar in this particular topic. This is your doctoral program is a time to explore.
Yeah, yeah, and this you've chosen a field, and Mark and I are both very big fans of this field and this career and what it can do for you. And you've chosen a field where, yes, there are some loose norms around building a clear research identity, but that norm can be violated, and you can still have a wonderful, successful career. And so it is something where there are plenty of people in our field who have had amazing careers, both in terms of subjective and objective career success, who never have really developed that clear identity. And that's part of the great part of this profession is it does give you a bit of a tailwind in certain instances if you have that, but it's not an impediment to success if it never quite comes together.
Completely agree. Should we move on to the next question?
Yeah, let's do.
So I'm going to ask you, what does it mean when you say to have an impact? And how do you personally see yourself having an impact, either in the field or in practice or both, or how do you see that?
Yeah. So I'll just start by saying, I define impact as having a positive impact on the world, usually the world of work. But the world of work looms so large in people's lives that if you have a positive impact on the world of work, it's going to have a positive impact on the world more broadly. Now, the publications are the currency of our profession. But I'm sure you'll hear multiple times that nobody outside of our profession reads AMJ for the most part, right? Nobody reads ASQ. And that can be something that, can be a little bit depressing. And you can say I put all this work into it, it's so difficult. But thankfully, you're living in an age now where it's very easy for us, or it's easier than ever to disseminate the findings of our research to a broader audience and have the positive impact that you sort of dreamed about maybe when you thought up the idea for the paper. And so I think, again, this profession is set up really nicely to have a positive impact on the world in all four areas of our jobs. And I would say that's research, teaching, service to the institution, and then external impact, external engagement. And those four things are sort of symbiotic, like they fuel off each other. And so the more that you get excited about your research area and understand it well, you're probably going to teach a class where you're able to bring that into the classroom and have that direct impact on students, or at least a few of the students in the classroom, right? And the nice thing is the students will give you feedback on those ideas, and they'll say, I worked this summer at the grocery store, and that's not what happened at all, what you're describing. And you'll get like a research idea from talking to students about that. At the same time, like I said, we have a chance to do external engagement as well. And so I think it used to be that as soon as you got your conditional acceptance, you went out and celebrated and then thought about, okay, how do I finish up this publication and put it to bed and never have to sort of think about it again. And I think increasingly, when that conditional acceptance comes, or even before it, you're thinking about, how do I take this publication and make sure that it has a positive, the knowledge in that publication gets out and has a positive impact on the world of work. And so we can do this in a number of ways, but it builds up over the course, these things build up over the course of your career. And so maybe the first publication you have, you publish it and you send it to HBR, and HBR to pitch it to them as doing an online piece about it, and they turn it down, and a few other places turn it down, and you end up just putting it on like your own blog or your own website or something like that. Eventually people will pick up on that, and you'll pick up a few LinkedIn followers and subscribers. And over time, as you do these activities, you'll get more and more known as somebody who, I don't like the term thought leader, but as somebody who can translate your research into the real world to have a positive impact. And increasingly, the people are looking at universities and questioning the value of what these universities do. And I think organizational psychology translates really easily into, here's the implications of our work on the real world. Some of the other business disciplines have a more difficult time, not that they're not as important, but it's just not as readily transferable. So I think we have this great opportunity as organizational psychologists to amplify the impact of our work. And I'm happy to, I think Mark is too, happy to talk about the different ways to do that, such that we have a positive impact on the world. And at the end of the day, it's also kind of neat that instead of like taking the AMJ and sending it to your family and saying like, this is a big deal in my field, trust me, even though it's pretty dense and difficult to read, that you've got a little HBR.org or LSE Business Review or something like that, that you can send around and get the sort of extrinsic motivation through your family that way as well. But I do think we have this great opportunity to have positive impact through our work that prior generations really didn't have. And I think you all should be excited about that. What do you think, Mark?
Yeah, I'll just, I'm on the same page, and I think really in the past 15 years or so it's a development that I got my PhD in 2000. So when I came out, I don't think there was sort of this appetite from the media and the business press, HBR, those sorts of outlets for sort of translations of scientific research into academic research into practitioner pieces. But now there, like Anthony was saying, there really is an appetite. And I send a lot of things based on my research. I might send it to HBR, and they reject it. They're not interested. But it's worth doing. It's worth talking to your faculty, and especially if anyone in your faculty have had some experience with that sort of thing. I think that's a great way. Like Anthony, I think I like to think of impact very broadly. So I really do feel like when I teach maybe practicing managers is when I feel like I'm having the most immediate impact, because I'll teach something in class, and the next class I'll say, I came and I said that to my boss, or that sort of thing. That I find that very rewarding. And so I think impact in terms of teaching and sort of instilling the values about what are the right ways to run organizations is, like Anthony said, a great way to make an impact and to make the world a better place, especially with regard to work, where we spend a lot of our lives. But then it's also things like service, and the folks here who are running this this workshop, and obviously they're going to have a tremendous impact on the people who are participating in the workshop. And being a journal reviewing is an impact, and being an editor, there are going to be lots of opportunities to have impact in different ways, which is, again, one of the great things about this profession. And also within your institution, you'll also be able to have an impact by serving on certain committees. And, so I think it's, maybe in the job crafting sense, that you sort of find the ways of having impact that sort of play to your strengths and your interests. And I think that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah, and I would add on top of that a couple of things, and one is an FYI, and then another is a piece of advice. So just from an FYI standpoint, universities are getting better at this as well. The marketing functions are, and so you probably in your college or in your university, there's a Marcom department that will actually help you publicize your research, and it depends on the institution how good they are at that. But it's worth asking when you get to the conditional accept stage. Ask your faculty: is there a Marcom department who may want to write up a press release for that? So keep that in mind. And the other thing I would say is sometimes you will get contacted by media as a result of a publication, because the media is getting savvier at reading in a really good way. There's journalists out there who are getting savvier at reading our work and saying, I want to do a story about this. And that can be very intimidating the first time you get that call, or the second time, or the fifth time, or whatever. And I would encourage you to use that Marcom department, use your faculty, but probably to say yes to the opportunity to get your research out there. And realize that when you talk to journalists, you can say, I don't know, or I'd rather not answer to anything. You don't have to answer all the questions they have and so forth. But the first few times I did interviews, it was pretty intimidating. And the university had sent me through media training, but it was still pretty scary. But after you do it a couple times, you realize that you have more control over the situation that you would think. And so I think part of us, we think of ourselves first and foremost as scientists and not as marketers. Why do I have to go out and do these things? Hopefully Mark and I have convinced you, like or you already were convinced there's a good reason for us to get our research out there. But I'd also say, saying yes is a big deal. And, Lauren mentioned at the beginning, this great resignation thing. I'll tell you, like the way that happened, and this will happen, maybe the same thing won't happen to you, but over the course of our career, it's strange how things happen if you're open to them and potentially saying yes. So like my first year at Oklahoma, Adam Grant visited Oklahoma because he's a fan of Mark's work. And Mark was like, you should meet with this person. His work is really good. And so my very first year, I made the connection, and nothing really, it was a nice meeting, but nothing, really came of it beyond that. And then fast forward to the Penn. So I did my dissertation on resignations. I published one thing out of it and didn't do a whole lot else with it. During the pandemic, I had this thought that there was going to be this wave of resignations, but it would have just stayed in my head, except for there was a journalist who had gotten a story to do a story on how to quit your job for the Seattle Tribune. And this journalist was on the swim team at Harvard with Adam Grant. And so she reached out to Adam and said, I'm, interested in doing a story on how to quit your job. Could you give me some thoughts on it? And he said, no, but there's this one person who studied resignations for his dissertation who I remember. So the journalist contacted me, and I sort of felt like I don't know if I should say out loud that I think there's going to be this wave of resignations. I'm not sure. It's just based on our org theories and nothing else. But I mentioned it offhand at the end of the interview, and she picked up on it and asked me to re-interview again for Business Week and say the same thing, which I was happy to do. And I didn't think anything of it, and it's had, I think, a positive impact on the world, and it's also had like a neat impact on my career, and it's opened a lot of doors and allowed me to do things that I wouldn't otherwise be able to do. So that's my sort of pitch for like not stretching yourself where you're like looking for these sorts of things, but being open to them when they come, I think is important. And realizing that there's resources around you, including Mark and I or whoever else that can help with, navigating the intricacies of doing an interview with the media and so forth.
I will just say there was a time during the pandemic that I sort of wanted to strangle Anthony because I kept seeing the Great Resignation like in a headline every day for 2 years or something. But that is probably the exception. That you get that sort of notoriety. I will say from within our field, I think people are looking at scholarly impact a lot because we don't see what you're doing in the classroom. maybe we don't pay too much attention to what you're saying to practitioners. So we're most familiar with that. But I will say, like in my experience, administration, the dean's office, the president's and provost's offices, they in some ways value those practitioner-oriented articles in HBR or Sloan Management or LSE, these different places that publish this sort of thing. They value those quite a bit. And so, like Anthony was saying, the way the attention that universities are getting and questions that are being raised about the impact that we're having and the value that we're creating, those are kind of tangible things that you can say you're influencing what's actually happening in organizations. So I do think it's something that you should be mindful of. Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next one.
Yeah.
Because I can't remember what sort of time we have, but I think we're getting close.
We've got a few minutes left.
So
Yeah.
I had a question. This question was about, staying true to your values while remaining competitive on the job market. How do you sort of balance that?
Yeah, so I think this goes back a little bit to thinking broadly and narrowly about what your research profile is. But there is a point where you do have to be fairly honest with the type of work that you do. You really want to be careful of like stretching yourself too far in terms of methodology, in terms of area that you're interested in. If a school is looking for a qualitative scholar or a quantitative scholar and you're the opposite, that job posting probably isn't for you. Or you can apply for it and just try to wow them, but be honest that you're not a qualitative scholar, you're not a quantitative scholar, and see, and maybe you'll find out sometimes the only way that the school could get the job posting approved is if they said we need to hire a qualitative scholar, but they're really actually pretty flexible on it. So I do think you need to be careful about stretching yourself too far. And I guess an example would be, here at UCL, my group essentially has three foci. It's creativity, diversity, and networks. And you really need to be doing work in one of those three areas to be hired here. And I've chaired the committee here last year, and I'll do it again this year. And we encourage people to define themselves broadly, but that they need to have some sort of meaningful connection to those areas. I really wanted a job here when I was applying here 3 years ago. Nobody would look at my profile and say that I'm creativity, networks, or diversity. And so when I applied, I was really, and realized I was later in my career, but I was really upfront with them that, like, yes, from a diversity perspective, I have papers where I use gender as a moderator, and it has some diversity implications. There's creativity as a DV on some of my stuff, but I want to be honest with you, although I'm interested in these three areas, I mean, networks is a bit further out for me, but even though I'm interested in these three areas, I'm not in one of these areas. And they said, okay, well, fortunately for you, the school's grown big enough that we can take sort of a more person who's maybe not quite squarely fit in one of these three areas, and then we'll get right back to it with our next hiring cycle. And so I think that was an example where, like, I really wanted a job here, and I was tempted to say, like, maybe I should just, bone up on some networks talk so that I can, talk the lingo and sort of say that I'm interested in these different areas. But that's going to come back in the long run and not be very good for you. So I think there is this element where you just have to be honest with yourself, talk to your peers and talk to your advisor and say, like, how much of a stretch is too much of a stretch if a job posting is looking for a certain person. And the same thing goes for your one-on-one conversations on the job market. It's fine to show interest in these different areas, but being really honest about who you are, I think is important. And I realize that's easier to say as somebody who has a job on the other side of it than when you're looking for a job. But I understand the temptation that's there when you're looking. What do you think, Mark?
Well, I would say I would err on the side of applying for jobs, even if they're not on paper the best fit for you, because having posted jobs and then looked at applicants, sometimes you're like, this person actually, I think, I prefer their profile, or, so I think a lot of us are pretty versatile in terms of what we can do. And so I wouldn't read too much into those descriptions. Sometimes they're kind of boilerplate things. Sometimes it's a committee that came up with that, and the committee doesn't necessarily all agree about these things. So what I'd be more cautious about is kind of misrepresenting yourself. You don't want to, because like Anthony was saying, I mean, you have to live with what you say. So you know, you don't want to say things like, oh, I love to teach any specialized HR class. I could teach compensation. I can teach training and development. You know, and then when you know get the job, you're like, ugh, I don't want to, you know, these are not classes I would want to teach, or that I feel like I have the expertise. Those are the things I think that I would worry about the most. Obviously, you want to get the job, but you know, I wouldn't say things that aren't true, unless maybe you are flexible enough that you are willing to teach those things, then that's fine. But I would just be careful about, you know, you want to be honest about what your interests are. You're trying to um, find a place where you're going to be happy. You know, that was part of the point of probably picking this career path too, is that you wanted to enjoy it. And so it could be short-sighted to take something that's not the right fit, you know, just so you can have something.
Yep. I completely agree.
So,
We had, oh yeah, go ahead, Laura.
oh, I was just gonna say we have just a couple minutes and then we'll open it up to Q&A. So also if you want to answer the question, but if you have any like last thoughts before Q&A, that would be great too.
I guess the last thought that I'll share is I think it's also helpful as you look at different research areas. If people tell you that a certain research area is dead, I would sort of pump the brake. I wouldn't take their word that a given research area is dead. The world of work is like always changing, and it's arguably changing faster now than ever. And so I wouldn't put too much stock in somebody saying that. I think most of our major topics are evergreen to some extent because the world of work is changing fast and we have to constantly revisit. So that was, I don't know if that's a good final thought, but that's my final one for now.
I won't use names, but I was told on my job talk that citizenship behavior was a dead area, and that it was nice that I had a paper on citizenship behavior, but that I should find another area to do research in. And that was, you know, 26 years ago, and you know, I'm still writing papers on that topic. Probably that person isn't enjoying it. And they were a senior level person and the main editor at a very prominent and prestigious journal in our field. So, you know, I think you have to be willing to take ownership of your career and make choices that you believe in. You know, we're just giving you advice. And like Lauren said, this advice may or may not work for you. It's advice that's worked for me and for Anthony, but everybody's different. And so, you know, ultimately you are in charge of your own career. And so you need to make the choices that you think are the right ones. And sometimes that may mean going against some of the advice of faculty. You know, again, some faculty might not appreciate me giving you that advice, but I just think it's the reality. You know, you are adults and this is your career and your life, and you need to make the choices that are right for you.
Thank you both so much for your insights about identity and impact. I'd like to open it up for our audience. If you have questions that you want to put in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand or use the little raise hand function, I'm going to remove the spotlight so we can see everyone in the audience. So while we're waiting for some,
Can I ask something?
Jake.
Oh,
Oh,
go
and
ahead.
Sarah has a question as well. So Sarah, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Sure. Thank you so much for all this information. This was great. I have a question about keeping up with your context throughout, we're still early on. And so there's some people who have offered help and who we want to stay in contact with, but also don't want to have meaningless conversations and check-ins. So when do you think it's best to reach out with your idea or to get feedback and just sort of keep up with those ties that you have in the field?
So I can answer, then Mark can chime in. That's a really great question, and I think it is like a muscle that you should develop to some extent in terms of keeping your contacts going, keeping connections with these people. And I don't want to steal his thunder, 'cause Mark's really good at this, but like, you probably subscribe to, or you should subscribe to like all of the table of contents email blasts, or however you get information, but all the new issues, online first articles that come out, you should get those. And if you see someone in your network who has a publication, why not reach out, take a look at the abstract, see what you like about it, and then send it to them and, say, hey, congrats, here's, this is a great topic, great outlet, and so forth. The same is true when you're looking at in the real world and you're reading Business Week or The Economist or whatever, and you see a story that actually has to do with one of your peers' research. Just shoot the story over to them and say, this called to mind your work. Hope all is well. Those sorts of things, and then I think, you sort of keep these relationships going, and you're building out actually a lot of social capital or goodwill while you're doing that. And I think when you've built up a little bit of that social capital, a little bit of that goodwill, then you can ask somebody if, they have 30 minutes for a Zoom to talk about an idea, or if they happen to have time at Academy, can you stop by their session and maybe chat for a few minutes afterwards? I do think it's okay to cold call somebody. Worst they can say is no, and I don't think there's anything wrong with cold calling, but I think you'll just have higher chances of success if you've already established a bit of a connection. And I think that one way to do it is just those little check-ins when people come to mind.
Yeah,
And I'm
great.
going to say something that's probably, again, a little bit controversial, because I always hear this advice, like, you have to network. When you go to Academy, go to the socials, go to the, I'm not like that. I'm introverted. I don't like going to socials. There are ways, though, that you can continue to network in sort of the ways that Anthony talked about. When I go to session, I do go to sessions. I do introduce myself to people. I meet all the other presenters. I think there are ways to build networks that, for those of you who may be more, maybe less outgoing in that way, and feel intimidated about the idea of going to certain things. I think people are very welcoming at them, but I know sometimes that can be intimidating. But I think you can also form relationships very organically by reaching out to other people through email, setting up meetings at Academy or other meetings through sessions in ways that may be less intimidating and feel a little bit more natural for you. So again, I'm not advising you not to do that, but I'm just saying that's not the only way to create a network.
Thank you both. Jake, I saw your hand up next.
Cool. Yeah. Thanks, Mark and Anthony. This is good stuff. I just finished up my third year at Iowa, but my question is, in terms of impact, what is your take on projects that have either gotten rejected or you lose steam on them? Do you feel like you have more impact if you keep pushing those and eventually publish them somewhere, even if it's not an A journal? Or do you feel like you have more impact if you kind of kill those and spend your time doing something else?
I'll go ahead and jump on that, because I have plenty of papers that are not in the very top journals, and some of them have had pretty good impact if you look at just sort of like impact factor. And some of those also sort of complement my portfolio of maybe better quality publications and help shape my identity. So I'm not somebody, now some of you may work at universities, and I know I've had some friends in this case where it's like, if it doesn't get in one of the A's, it goes in the file drawer. I've never had that, and I will tell you, I've had mixed success with these things, because sometimes you're like, why am I still working on this paper? It will be amazing to me if you, in your career, don't have periods where you're asking yourself, how did I get into this paper and how can I possibly get out? Because I constantly do that, and making these decisions about when to not keep going is very difficult. And I struggle with it even, 25 years into my profession. But I think if you believe in the idea, a lot of times there's value in getting it out there just so you can cite it yourself sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I'd agree. I'm not somebody who file drawers stuff either. I tend to do the escalation of commitment. Plus, I like the papers that I'm working on. And, I have a paper on like, happy hours and whether they're inclusive or exclusive. And it was a kind of a niche topic, but I like happy hours. I like the idea. It got bounced from all the top journals, and I was very happy to have it find a home anywhere. There's other papers that'll feel like more of a slog, but as long as someone on the author team hopefully is excited about it and it's kind of in their wheelhouse and you still enjoy, there's not a toxic relationship with your co-authors or something like that. I think pushing forward on it is a good thing to do. And in some cases, when you're in your shoes, you have senior faculty that want you to keep pushing on it. And so you don't really have a choice. And that's just part of the profession. The one thing I will say is I said what I just said to you all, like at maybe 10 years ago, I was at a conference at Wharton where I was like, I don't know why anybody file drawers anything. I think everything, I fall in love with my projects and I publish them wherever they are. And there was a senior faculty at Wharton who said, it depends on the institution you're at, Anthony. So there are institutions, perhaps this one, where it's not a big deal if you publish in a lower tier journal, but if it's lower quality work, that becomes a problem. So like at Oregon State, they were never going to look at like a lower tier pub and say like, Anthony, this is not very good and it doesn't reflect well on Oregon State. But I think there are institutions where it's not necessarily that it's a lower tier journal, but it's not the best work that we want to be producing. So it depends on the institution you're at as well.
We probably need to move on, but I'll just add one thing. I am a little bit mindful of sort of my ratio of high quality to lower quality. And so I do feel sometimes there's people who, when you look at their profile, you're like, you have to look really carefully to see that they really have a lot of top publications because they're interspersed with a lot of not as top publications. And so that can affect your identity, and so I think you have to be mindful of that, maybe that mix a little bit. And also there may be chances to take like, I've had some projects where I'm like, look, this is no longer where I want to be. I'll be happy to move to the end of the author chain, and you all can sort of drive the project if you'd like to keep going with it.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question I saw was from Poonam.
Hi, thank you for your talk and thank you for having this session. Found it really helpful. So this question was based on, Anthony, your comment on the fact that your dissertation topic was not necessarily this, your advisor's research focus. So I was wondering how you navigated that, because I think I'm in my second year. I just completed my second year at Boston College, and I might be in a similar position. And I was wondering, where you went for help or, specific research topic advice, since your research topic was not necessarily the same as your advisors.
Yeah, well, great question. And there were a couple things in my favor. One of them was Mark's openness to be on board with it and go along with me on the journey. I was also going to dabble with a qualitative piece of the project, which was also at the time out of Mark's wheelhouse, not as much anymore. So we added I took a qualitative seminar and we added that person to the committee. I also reached out and connected with some turnover scholars who didn't join the committee because that could have potentially been high risk just to like add people to the committee from different areas, but partly leaned on my prior network and Mark's network to make some connections with turnover scholars. But the main thing was mainly just realizing that it was going to be on my shoulders to drive this through, which is always true in a dissertation, but it's often dissertations are more of if you're in the area of your advisor, it can be much more of a collaboration than one person clearly driving it. And so, so I'd say I wouldn't add external members to your committee unless you really know them well to supplement it. But I think you can use your network a little bit. And like, just keep in mind, resignations is not that complicated of a topic also. So it was something that like most people can instantly get their heads around. If it was something more complex, I might have had more hesitation.
I'll just add, and I told Anthony this, I've been through the review process on citizenship papers, and I kind of know what reviewers are going to look for, what they're going to harp on, those sorts of things. And I told him, look, I can make educated guesses because I've had a lot of experience, but I'm not going to know sort of the idiosyncrasies that I might know in these other areas. The advantage of what Anthony did is that he established his own identity apart from me sort of early on, so that's an advantage. I will also say my advisor did not want me to do a different topic, and I wanted to, and he basically said no. So in that case, I did the topic in the area that was more aligned with his interests, and that other topic I was interested in, I eventually published that by myself on my own. And in some ways that worked out better for me because, again, like Anthony, I sort of established my own identity apart from him because I had done that side project on my own. So it can work either way. So I would keep an open mind about it if you're working with someone who's sort of, it's going to create a lot of problems if you do something very different.
Thank you, guys. We'll squeeze in one last quick question from the team.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking the time to do this talk with us. And so my main question was really about like just general bits of advice for approaching faculty on potential research collaborations. As I just wrapped up my second year at Boston College, and I'm sort of like having met with my advisor, like to talk about like pursuing more research projects and how like there's a data set that I'm sitting on, but I think some of the literature isn't fully within my own research interest, but I feel like there's a potential piece there about like, so the specific example is about like the nonprofit organizations that I studied, and I feel there's a passion and org change angle, but I think really my main question is about like, what are some good bits of advice with approaching faculty on receiving feedback on a paper and also potential collaborations on such projects?
Yeah, I would say, go and have those conversations with faculty. You mentioned that you have a data set. I think that gives you a real, sort of leg up in a lot of ways, because one of the things as a busy faculty member, I'm hoping people are coming to me, students are coming to me when they do, and really want to get involved. I'm hoping a lot of times they're coming with some really good idea, something that's sort of developed, a data set, a data collection opportunity. Some of my first projects as a PhD student, I went and sort of lined up data sets along with the idea that I was presenting. I think the more that you can bring to the table, the more receptive faculty are going to be. And then you may have to shop around a little bit sometimes to find the right faculty who has the bandwidth to get involved and has the sort of expertise that you need.
I know we're out of time. I'll just say this really quickly. Building relationships with faculty, it's not just about the research, about you bringing them research ideas or them bringing you research ideas. It's also, how can I make my faculty's job easier in other areas? And so I was like, if faculty need help with their teaching, if they need help with their service, if they're running a exec ed thing on the weekend and they'd love to have help with it, I think those are other ways where if you do those sorts of things, reciprocity kicks in. And when you ask for their time to look over an idea, they're much more inclined to do it if you've made their lives easier and built some social capital in other ways.
Thank you.
Thank you both so much, Mark and Anthony. This was really great, a good primer for the start of our opening plenary session. So thank you both so much.
Absolutely. Our pleasure. I'll speak for Mark. If anybody has more questions or wants to talk more about this, I think just reach out.
Yeah, feel free to send an email. You can copy both of us and we'll be happy to chime in. Enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you both. I'm going to turn it over to Ben, who will introduce our next speaker.
Hey everyone, very excited to introduce our next speaker. Before I hop into that, I'm going to encourage everyone, do a big stretch break. I was getting a little tight, so I encourage you, we're getting into the second hour of this session, so please take a moment to stretch. But while you do that, I will introduce our next speaker, Dr. Margaret Luciano, who is an associate professor of management and organization at the Smeal College of Business and a BNY Mellon faculty fellow. She studies the dynamics and effectiveness of teams, leaders, and complex systems with a focus on healthcare settings. So she's going to be talking today about the messy, challenging, but exciting process of launching your dissertation and everything that goes into that. So thank you for being here. Please take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Just a quick slide check. Everything looking good?
Looks great.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me again today. I was excited to start to hear some of the questions at the end. I was like, all right, this is a topic that people are excited to talk about. We can talk a little bit about choosing a topic, about forming your committee, and maybe just take a little bit more time to unpack some of those, really tricky questions during this really exciting time, but also maybe a little bit of an anxiety-inducing time, that you're shifting a little bit from, okay, we've been taking a lot of courses and maybe, hopefully being involved in some research, but maybe being involved in research is sort of a part of a research team. To be thinking about, oh, I'm going to lead something. And all right, so what are we going to do with that piece? And really starting to expand out your research portfolio in this really exciting way. So a couple of years back, I did a very informal and unscientific survey asking a couple hundred scholars in management, which of the following figures most closely resembles what your dissertation process looked like? And so I will give you a moment to guess. You can guess quietly which of them you think got the highest score, and which one that you were mentally prepared for as you're thinking about your dissertation process. And these were the numbers that actually came back through. So there is no one in my network that their dissertation went exactly perfectly as they had envisioned from beginning to end. And honestly, I think that 2% might be slightly misremembering. And I will say at least one of them was in a very highly established lab data collection setup. So, particularly depending on the kind of data you're thinking about, if you're thinking about some messy field data, like it's going to be this messy nonlinear process. And the piece that I'm raising with that is just to raise awareness of that, because that allows you to approach it more strategically. Because it's not a question of if you will run into challenges. It's a matter of the magnitude, the duration, and the frequency. Like, how big are these and how prepared am I to deal with them? So as we go through this next set, as we talk about things like choosing your topic and forming your committee, there's going to be 3 core takeaway points that you're going to watch me come back to. Building in Slack. You're seeing from this very first slide why that's important. You have to build in Slack resources, Slack time. If you're planning on option A, and then any of the other following things occur, then that's when things can start to fall apart and get really messy. So we're going to build in Slack. We're going to talk about building a support team and then protecting the core. Okay, so let's jump right into choosing a topic. So let's talk a little bit about content. One of the things that the questions I often hear are, should I study a similar topic or a different topic? Now that can be similar or different to what you had previously studied, or similar or different to your advisor. And we'll talk about this in a couple different ways. So there's some key things to consider. One is your desired future state. So my early career research, so the first couple of years of my doctoral program, the research opportunities that were available to me were on psychological empowerment. as you heard from my introduction, no one thinks of me as a psychological empowerment scholar. I'm very happy that those papers were published. I'm tremendously grateful for the opportunity to have learned how to do research, but that wasn't where I wanted to move in my future career. So for me, that was a good pivot point of, okay, I've built my research skills, and now I'm going to pivot more towards, the types of work that I want to be doing. You also heard from the speakers on the previous session that, okay, so maybe that pivot comes at your dissertation, but maybe it will even come later than that. Your dissertation is one project, and sometimes people can get really emotionally caught up in that. And yes, you will be spending a lot of time on it. So it is good to be very, very thoughtful. But, maybe if you don't have people to support you in your desired topic, you can at least think through, is this something I want to learn now? Or is this something that I want to learn later? So thinking about access to relevant expertise. So again, for my dissertation, I wanted to do a qualitative dissertation. And there were no qualitative scholars where I was. I was like, you know what? I'm going to put a pause on that. I did more mixed methods, I developed some skills, and I developed those skills as an assistant professor. So again, you may just decide that, okay, what is the challenge I want to tackle? Is it a new topic area? Is it a new method? What is the piece of this that is uniquely mine? What supports are around? And then what are the pieces? It's like, careers are long. You will have many, many decades, most likely, to do all sorts of amazing research. And don't stress about packing it all into your dissertation. That last piece is also around optimal distinctiveness. So there are different kind of notions and ideas around how different what you're doing should be from what your advisor or what the faculty do. This is just that little piece of just, again, thinking through if you do something fundamentally different, and if it's in a very complex area. So if you're trying to do research on complex team arrangements like multi-team systems, and there is no one that has even done teams research around you, I encourage you to think very deeply about that decision. So it's just, again, thinking about, but versus doing something a little bit different that can still be uniquely you in your own special way. What is that piece? What is that space? So as you kind of work through those things, if you have the opportunity, particularly if you're here a little bit early, if you're here at the end of your second year and you're like, I've got time, I'm excited, work on becoming the you want to be in the future. So specific details aside, who do you want to be? What kind of scholar do you want to be? What skills do you want to have? Who do you want to be in the future? And if you can start working towards that now on your dissertation, that's an amazing place to be. And then when we're thinking about choosing a topic, it's not just a topic like, okay, I'm going to look at coordination or teams or roles or voice. There's also the question of scope. And it's the question of, do I swing for the fences or do I just bunt? And my question back to you is, what is the philosophy of your program? So what is the philosophy of your department? What is the philosophy of your advisor? So I see huge, huge variance in the field of whether your dissertation is just another project. The only good dissertation is a done dissertation. Like it's a project that you're kind of leading. Versus like this dissertation is your magnum opus, your great work. This is your calling card on the academic job market. And this is what you will be known for. And then everything in between. So just understand your department, your advisor, that and it's not to say that you're 100% beholden to whatever it is that is the norm, but if you're going to violate it, do so thoughtfully, maybe give some people a heads up, build in some time. So just, again, if you're going to do something very different, just thoughtfully, willfully, not accidentally, and kind of like a sort of a mishap. And also get a lot of clarity on whether your dissertation proposal is a contract versus an opportunity for feedback. Again, you'll see huge variation in that of everything in your dissertation, like that's proposal is a contract. You must do everything in there. Like you basically have your tables filled out except for the numbers, like everything's lined out. Like, I mean, it's really, really detailed. And if you go do it, you get your degree and everyone says, congratulations. Versus, okay, like you're going to propose and you're going to get some feedback. Now, some of this could be methodology. Some of this could be, if you're doing a grounded theory qualitative study versus a quantitative study in the lab, some of these things will be a little bit more driven by design, but do be very, very certain you understand the expectations of your department, your advisor, that, what is, if you put all these things in your dissertation proposal, are all of those things expected? We'll loop back to that point as we talk about protecting the core. Because if you're doing a big field data collection, there might be the piece that's like, hey, this is what is my dissertation proposal. And here's all the other data I'm going to try to get while I'm there. So just understanding that there might be pieces that's like, oh, I want to get feedback on this. This is like the big scope project, hopefully multiple publications. And this is the piece that is the dissertation. As you are thinking about scope, also think very, very deeply. What is your current situation? What does the rest of your research portfolio look like? I always start with students when we're meeting about what the research portfolio, the status of the different projects. So particularly as you're thinking about, again, the norms of your program. Some programs are much more structured toward you're going to get publications before you're graduating. Some are a little bit more, no, it's going to be your dissertation, and maybe there'll be something at an R&R phase. Thinking about, the types of jobs you want may also dictate how you're managing your portfolio, and just really thinking about the variety of projects. I caution you as you're moving into this kind of phase, sometimes students are like, I need publications, I need to get a bunch of projects. If you're on a bunch of projects, are you actually moving any of them? And are you providing good work on any/all of them? So are you inadvertently burning a lot of bridges with a lot of people because you're not doing good work? I've seen this a fair amount. So just being very cautious as you're thinking about these pieces. A lot of times people will be very thoughtful and give you space to focus on your dissertation, but just really be thoughtful of those pieces and be thoughtful to not, I'm going to take on all these projects and learn all these things. And particularly if you don't yet fully have a sense of exactly how long it takes to do a project. That R&R process, which comes back at really predictable time periods with a really predictable amount of work. So, and we were really hoping that second R&R was going to be a conditional accept, and unfortunately got rejected, those sort of situations. So just being thoughtful. So we're just trying to build awareness of the broader context in which these decisions can exist. So we have the rest of your portfolio, the available resources, and your access to opportunity. So just really taking full stock of your current situation. And please remember, build in Slack. This is the time to be realistic, not optimistic. So things tend to take longer than you predict, at least for most people I know. 2.5 times, the 2.5 times rule is one I've heard quite commonly. If you're working with big complex data sets in healthcare, it's probably 5 times. So if you attempt to be realistic up front, then hopefully you still at least maybe kind of sort of have a little slack by the time you're moving through. So the next piece is about forming a committee, and we'll talk a little bit about the size question, a little bit about the composition question. So this pulls back into some of the previous conversation from the last speaker, and thinking a little bit of, if forming a committee is less more. It's like you get their input, but you need to respond to their input. So, and you heard a little bit of that strategy in there. So that's one of the key pieces of, if it's someone that you're asking for a friendly review versus someone who you're asking to be a committee member, that's very, very different. Friendly review, if they make recommendations that you don't care for, someone who's a committee member, they make recommendations you don't care for, that may be maybe a small issue or even a much bigger issue, which we'll talk a little bit as we talk about your chair. But just being thoughtful that sometimes people are like, I want to get all these people and all these opinions and all these perspectives. And then there's a lot of different perspectives. And are you prepared to manage through that? Are you prepared to manage through that as an individual? And also very, very much in terms of time. This is a timeline. If you're like, hey, I am at the end of my 4th year and I'm thinking about going in the job market in 3 months and I'm thinking about launching my dissertation, less is more. Less is unequivocally more in this situation. In other circumstances, if you have more time. So for me, getting to work with some other, the multi-team system scholars. So, having an external member that was a real expert in the domain, you start to form connections, relationships, and get to have, again, a broader perspective, which was amazing if there's time, and also if there's a relationship, usually if there's a relationship between the committee members. So again, think about your committee chair, your department norms, department requirements. So some departments do require an outside member. Outside member can mean very different things. Outside the department, outside the institution, what do they mean when they say outside member? Also, consider the flexibility of the committee members. If you talk to other doctoral students, some committee members are very cognitively flexible. Others a little less so. They may be more or less flexible in terms of whether we're just talking about being cognitively flexible, or again, if you're doing something really big and messy. So again, I'm thinking toward field data collections, which always proceed in a perfectly predictable way. And if you're bringing on someone that thinks of it as a contract, and this is exactly what's going to happen exactly at these dates, and they're completely unwilling to bend on that, that's going to be a little tricky to navigate. And so it's just kind of working through some of those spaces, some of those pieces, and just again, if you're on a short timeline, or if you're trying to do something very different or very innovative, what are the support you need for your particular context? And as we think about overlapping value, I actually like to break it out with a chart that I'm going to show you on the next one. But the last piece I want to add when you're thinking about size is you can more easily add than you can subtract. It's much easier to ask someone to be on your committee than it is to kick someone off of your committee. I know very, very few people that have ever actively kicked someone off their committee. Now, someone might have left the institution, but hey, you were on my committee and now you're not. I'm not sure if that conversation goes better or worse than, hey, you were a co-author and now you're not. I'm gonna guess worse. We can do another informal polling on that one. So you might end up in a situation where you're like, okay, I have a sense of an idea. This is what I think I'm going to move forward to. I have this advisor I've been working with. It's been great. They're likely to be my chair. We might have some ideas of who we're going to ask. But we're going to wait to finalize it until the project itself has crystallized a little bit more. And letting the project itself crystallize a little bit more also helps you to know what you're going to need. You thought you were going to need this expertise, and actually, you know what? That's going to have to wait for another project. You thought you were going to be inviting this person, they have this really great access, this unique data, but that's actually not going to allow you to test your research question. So again, it's more easy to add than subtract. As you're thinking about the committee beyond just size, think about, well, what do you need from your committee? And you think about the expertise that you're hoping that they'll have. Now, there's some expertise that you'll be having, so it's not if it's not all perfectly in there, then you still may have an excellent team. You are also a member of that team. But in terms of content, in terms of methods, one of the stories I often share is there was a very, very talented individual who's moving into a doctoral program, and he wanted to study a topic I don't study, using a methodology I don't use. I knew how insanely talented he was and that I was the wrong person for him. So I wrote him a very nice letter of recommendation to work with someone else. So worked out great for him. He's going on the job market. He's had an amazing experience and is the scholar he wants to be. So I raised that for a couple points. One is just as you're thinking about fit. And two, when they were talking a little bit about approaching research and faculty, sometimes the reason why people are saying no, again, I saw so much potential in him and think he's excellent. I can't support him in becoming who he wants to be. So sometimes faculty are saying no because they're looking at it and going, I can't support you in who you want to be, and you want to have someone that can support you in those endeavors. So as you're forming your committee, though, you want your expertise, thinking about things like data and access. Letters of recommendation is another one that's at least just on the consideration list, that these people will have a much closer view of your work. If you've already collaborated with a lot of faculty, this may be less of a concern. But if you have not yet had a lot of those opportunities, these people are going to see your work up front, have really in-depth knowledge of how amazing you are, and be able to articulate it more fully in a letter of recommendation for you. What are the areas that you need guidance on? So think more about managing the process, that if you're trying to collect field data and no one on your committee has ever collected field data, having someone who's collected field data, probably helpful. So even things beyond method like longitudinal growth modeling, what are the other things you need to get this done? We talked about flexibility earlier. Do you need a mediator? Hopefully your department has a really wonderful culture, has amazing interprofessional respect for one another, and nobody has a drum that they beat in every meeting or every other meeting. But if that's not your lived reality, is there someone that's kind of the voice of reason among among some of the chatter or some of the differing opinions that may be very, very well intended, but we may have some broader debates going on in the field that are not something that is reasonable to ask to be solved in a doctoral student dissertation. So just again, all the different things that you might need. So there's the things that you would typically think of, but then just, the other idiosyncratic pieces. As you're thinking about that mediator, thinking about your chair, and who do you want to be your advocate? And just also the heads up that your chair will often help you to form the rest of your committee. So often, and check the norms where you are, that you would ask someone to chair, and you might have ideas of who you want on the committee, but they would have some input in that process, as opposed to saying, hey, you're the 4 people that are on my committee, and now I'm asking you to be the chair of these 4 people that are on the committee. That's a little, somewhat less normative in some places, but again, always check. And I'll say, as you're stepping back. So as you're stepping back on topic, you were thinking about how do you become who you want to be. As you're stepping back on thinking about the committee, you're building a support team. Support does not mean they're not going to challenge you, but are you thinking about bringing together people, not just people that you like, but people that are going to actively support you? Are these people that have the skills, have the time, have all of these different pieces that, again, they can come together and really help you as you're going through this pivotal point between, hey, I've learned about research and been a part of a team, to I can lead a project, I can lead a team. And then there's usually the great question of, okay, now where do I start? There's a lot of these pieces of, okay, do I form my committee? Do I pick my topic? What if my advisor doesn't like my topic? And then where am I going to study it? It's like, yep, no, it's an iterative process. They're interconnected. So you're gonna iterate. There are 2 papers that I love to recommend when you're thinking about this space. One is on methodological fit. So this is one of the challenges that I see so I mentioned, I really want to do a qualitative study. So I have since published them. I've since do a lot of mixed methods, but that was not where I was at the time. And there are certain research questions that are it's a better fit for a qualitative study. And you need to know that going in. So there's an AMR by Edmondson and McManus. It's on methodological fit. And the one that I co-authored with some of my amazing colleagues is on measurement fit. That particularly if you're starting to think about big data streams, or really just like, oh, I want to study coordination. How does coordination manifest in the context in which you wish to study it? Like, if you're telling me about these multi-level temporal dynamics, and sometimes I see really sophisticated theories, and you just told me you were going to measure that with a single survey. There's no levels and there's no dynamics. So thinking very, very deeply about measurement fit. So those 2 pieces will really help as you're moving from, okay, this is kind of my content, to, can I study this? Is there one organization in the world where this phenomenon occurs? If so, we can, park the generalizability or transferability discussion for a moment, but do you have access to that one organization in the world? So just really thinking about those things before you go too far downstream on, this is everything that I would ever want to be, is keeping that little bit line of sight to, is there a potential, most dissertations are empirical. I'm unaware of an institution that doesn't have some empirical element to it, question mark. I'm guessing someone on the call will be able to give us an example. So check your norms, but since it needs to be an empirical study and you're testing the theory you're building, do keep a tight eye on those elements of that context. But as you're thinking about that, you don't need to just think about, well, what do I have access to? You know, friends and family, whether they're your actual friends and family or your academic friends and family, alumni, adjunct faculty who do a lot, typically in many institutions, do a lot more consulting than standard tenure track faculty. What organizations are they working with? We recently launched an amazing DBA program, so Doctorate of Business Administration. That's where my students' field data is coming from. So starting to work on partnering, and that will be the piece that I'll just double down on there, is partnering and building relationships. So I loved how that was highlighted at the end of the last call as well, building those relationships, that it's not just, here's my idea and I want to test it, give me your data. Step back. Thinking through some of those pieces of just being careful to build relationships with organizations that such that they would want to invite you back, want to give you more data. So the hospital that I collected my dissertation data at, there was the dissertation piece of it. But while I was there, outside of the scope of the dissertation, it's like, oh, well, can I have that data and that data and that data? I was doing a lot of other things for them, you know, leadership development workshop, all these different pieces. But that data is now, some of the first student I worked with, it was Hooray on the market. So that's Luciano Bartels et al. Manuel Volant, that was, he had an that data set as well. So this is beyond my dissertation. So beyond like that piece of it, what are the other, you know, there's plenty of things that you can, in many organizations, particularly larger organizations, there are many different research questions you could ask and answer if you had access to broader data. So thinking about those things, and I went back there to do research, more research a couple of years later. So build those relationships and learn some of those skills that if you're working with executives from your program, whether they're alumni, whether they're executive students, learning the skills that's like, okay, you're going to add value to me, and how do I add value to you? So as you're working through this process, start with, you need to know enough to know what a good opportunity looks like. So if you take all those details that we just worked through and step it back, you need to know enough to know what a good opportunity looks like, because not all field data is good data. Not all data from anywhere is good data. Like it's like, oh, you can describe something, but you have tested or built nothing. So you need to know enough to know what a good opportunity looks like. And if you have a chair established, start having that conversation with them. So one of my students is at the end of their second year, and we're having those conversations of like, okay, I need to know what a good opportunity would look like to him. So when I'm sitting with executives, when I'm somewhere that is not Pennsylvania, collecting data for a different project, it's like, oh, what else should I be looking for while I'm here? So I need to know enough to know what a good opportunity would look like. And so if we can at least get to that point of, okay, here's kind of a core, here's where I'm flexible, like again, core, what's really important, this is what we're going to do. And then, the flexible reality, and then this is, no, like I'm just not interested in that, or that's not going to be a theoretical contribution. It's not going to be these pieces. So working really on that opportunity assessment and being able to think through, what would a good opportunity look like to you? And so since we figured out where to start, then how do we get there? Make a timeline, check it monthly at least, work backwards from envisioning your job market. So if you think about envisioning your job market and you did a CV that wrote out like, all right, what would I want my CV to look like on the job market? Realistically, what would you want your CV to look like on, what would a realistic CV look like for you on the job market? And work backwards. So again, we think about your portfolio management of like, okay, you've suddenly got all these things here and you're trying to move all these papers through the review process. What time is there for a dissertation? Are all of those projects moving, or are they ideas? And maybe those ideas are for a later time to make more space for your dissertation. And be sure to build in Slack. Protect yourself from yourself. Encourage you to find an accountability buddy. So it could be one of your office mates, could be a friend from back home. I mean, maybe your parents, but yeah, maybe start with the peers that, who's going to be the one to be like, hey, how's work going on your dissertation? It's really common for this to go on the back burner behind everything else. That's like, oh, well, I'm working on it. I'm thinking about it. And then it kind of comes together in an unsatisfying way because it just got pushed with all the more proximal deadlines. And oh, you taught for the first time, and oh, this and oh, that. If you don't put time and effort into it, the product result will show. And for many people, that their dissertations, what they're presenting for their job market talks. So if you're thinking you're going to be presenting your dissertation for your job market talks, give it the time and attention it deserves, and give you the time and attention that you deserve in your development to really think through these things and grapple with these big challenges. Don't just pigeonhole yourself into, well, I'm going to play this role and that's going to be fine. You've taken in many programs 5 years, could be 4 to 6 years, 7 years. You're taking all these years to invest in becoming a version of yourself and really developing an incredible skill set to do really fascinating things, to actually create new knowledge. Give yourself that space to be able to do it, move through it, and develop it. Don't short circuit yourself by doing like very nibbly pieces. Get organized. Oh my goodness, get organized. Couple resources for that. I particularly like Getting Things Done by David Allen. There's a new version on Teams as well. And Atomic Habits. Whether you like Atomic Habits, whether you like The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, start working on your habits. Whether, it's doom scrolling or whatever it is, just like start working on those habits. Because those little changes can make huge differences. And when things get stressful, you really want to have your resilience, be mentally strong, whatever it is that you do, whether it's yoga, meditation, going for a run. I had a cohort mate which would say, the only people that think you can't run from your problems don't own a treadmill. So whatever it is that is your thing, but start figuring that out now. So when you're in the middle of it, it's like, okay, this is my thing. I'm ready. I got this. I saw it coming. And prioritize. So it goes back with the building slack. Like this is a time period where you are investing in you. You're prioritizing these things. Maybe this isn't time to pick up your 8th new hobby, which I know sometimes is fleeing behavior and a stress response, but figuring out like, what are you going to prioritize during this time, whether it's projects, what it is about you and your life. Just step back and prioritize. So at the end of it, you are happy with the outcome. And the last piece on protecting the core. So just to double down this point one more time, in your dissertation, be very thoughtful what is mission critical versus nice to have. I see people go super big, and I love big dissertations. I swung big, it was awesome, won all kinds of awards. But what's core? Because even in mine, there was the piece that fell apart. So there was the piece that worked out, and there was the piece where I was trying to get from between team coordination to across multiple areas, more toward a multi-team system. I knew I wanted to study multi-team systems, didn't quite get all the way there on my dissertation, got there also as an assistant professor. Assistant professor went well. That was a good time period. You get to do a lot of those things. We're like, I built the skills, but the opportunities didn't come quite together. So know what's mission critical, because if I had chased that, everything else would have crumbled. The things that created all the other project opportunities, the things that created an excellent dissertation would have crumbled if I didn't okay, that's not mission critical. I'm upset. I have to let it go. I will get there someday. I will test it another time. This is core. Dr. Luciano was very happy she protected the core, because otherwise wouldn't be Dr. Luciano. So just be thoughtful there. So know enough to know what a good opportunity looks like, chat with your advisor about it. And when tough cuts come or things start to go awry, what can you throw overboard? So know what's core and know just, all right, this is just going to be where we are. So in setting your path, yes, you'll have your plan. And in reality, you're going to hope it's going to look more like a walk in the park, and it's going to feel more like you've been through a Ninja Warrior course. But you're going to get through. You're going to get through. Maybe a little bit bruised, a whole lot stronger, a whole lot smarter. But as challenging as it looks, you'll take it one day at a time, 1 month at a time, which you'll check in with your accountability buddy, and it will work through in a really amazing way. So I want to wish all of you the best of luck in launching your dissertation, and I'm excited to open the floor for a few questions.
Yes, thank you so much. That was amazing and super helpful. So I have a question or two that I can ask, but I wanted to turn it over to our audience to see, does anyone have a specific question that arose? I'd love to default to the students in the audience first before I plug anything that I have. All right, Sarah, looks like we have a question from you. Take it away.
Hello, thank you so much, Professor Luciano. This was amazing and really engaging. So in my third year, which I'm going into, what would you say a typical day should look like? Should it be, 9 to 3 on dissertation and then maybe like 4 to 6 on teacher prep, or just what would that typically be, all the competing priorities? And it's also, the RA tasks.
So that is a great question, and thank you for prompting me to talk a little bit about that as well. So in addition to getting things done in atomic habits, learning your personal rhythms. So what time of day are you at your cognitive best? So for some people, that is the morning. And if you are at your cognitive best from 4 a.m. until 7 a.m., I strongly suggest you set that alarm and you're up at 3:45. But also don't use that time to go to the gym. And I know that sounds crazy because I'm not anti going to the gym, but maybe that's your evening activity. So being very, very, very thoughtful about your personal daily rhythms. The other really interesting rhythm that I've been, that sometimes people refer to as, and oh my goodness, hopefully someone can correct my technical terminology. It's not chunkers versus splitters, but people that like to do things in chunk versus more compartmentalized. So there's actual temporal theory on it. Now I'm really embarrassed. I can't remember the term, but the broader premise of it is that okay, is your best temporal rhythm of, okay, I'm going to, people will do I write for 2 hours every morning, or I write for 4 hours every morning, or whatever their piece is. I'm in the office by 8 and I write until noon. And then the afternoon is where they do their lower cognitive load work. Or some people like to just really intensely focus on a topic. I actually tend to fall a little bit into the latter camp. I really prefer to get my head very, very deeply into a specific project. I tend to work on slightly higher complexity things. The other reason I really like it is because when I'm trying to move projects, I will, whether you call it a summit or a scramble or whatever it is, most people you're working with on research are in multiple team membership arrangements. So we're not just on one team, we are on multiple teams. And again, those R&Rs are really predictable, and you thought your summer was going to be clear, and now there's 3. So you're how do you manage these pieces? So when you can have that focused time of okay, this is the 2 weeks we're really going to push this paper, and we're going to meet on it every day, and we're going to task out, and we're going to come back. Whether you're co-located, which I've done for larger scale qualitative analysis. Qualitative tends to get staler faster, at least for me. Versus some things that you can maybe compartmentalize out a little bit easier of, oh, hey, you finished this piece. So thinking about the nature of the task. Is it sequential, where you can have task decomposition and it's totally fine that people are working more separately? Versus, no, these are iterative decisions. And what we do here is going to impact a lot of this. So again, bigger things, bigger rewrites. Having people's attention and focus enables you to move things forward much more rapidly at a greater level of depth, consistency, and clarity. So for me, I love that. So I would do a little bit more oscillation of, okay, this is going to be my dissertation week, where all of my good cognitive load time is going to go into dissertation related topics. And then for the 2 or 3 weeks after that, here's the particular project that's going to move, and iterating in that way. You can tend to do a little bit more of that when you starting earlier. So you're talking about going into your 3rd year, that, if we're talking about a 5-year program, and you have 2 years where you're looking to accomplish. It's like, okay, like you can spend a week on your dissertation and not touch it for a month, and that would be fine, versus like, oh no, we need to move this. And then again, I say that would be fine, but we're also thinking about how large scale is the data collection. If you're thinking about, dynamics over time or field-based experiments with interventions, all of a sudden it's like, this is going to take a year to get this data. Or it's going to take 6 months or 7 months. And we know IRBs are super rapid and very responsive to our timelines, particularly hospital IRBs. So those are just some of those pieces. I guess the one thing I would say to be careful with is to not wait too long, just because of, again, that unpredictability that it's like, oh, all right, it gets if you're in the spring of your 3rd year and it gets delayed 2 months, 3 months, that's unfortunate, but no one's probably super stressing yet. If all of a sudden you start hitting those delays in the spring of your 4th year, very, very big deal. So building that slack into the system, but hopefully I answered the temporal rhythm question.
Great. I think we probably have time for one more question, and I see Poonam has her hand up, so I'll let her ask away.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for this session. It was very helpful. I especially liked your slide with the table with the X's with the dissertation chair and committee. So I had a question on that. So I was wondering what recommendations you had for how you would choose the chair. Is it like the one with the most X's? I was thinking about is like, do you prioritize the research topic versus someone is, more aligned with the methods that you're thinking about that would be a better, or what are your thoughts also on having co-chairs if you can't decide, especially?
So a lot of great questions. There's 2 pieces in there. One is the kind of the what do you have versus what do you need? And what is the unique piece? So if you're like, no, we've got access, then it's like, well, then you would be prioritizing access. The co-chair piece, I would question what is normative in your department. There, I can think of several departments where there's a couple faculty in particular, they're usually co-chairing, that they're both good at different things. Like, this is the person you're going to go to when you have a question on theory, and this is the person you're going to go to when you have a question on methods, and they co-chair and they get along great. They probably go out for happy hour every other weekend. Like, they're just, they work together perfectly. There are other situations where co-chairing can get a little bit more tricky, in the sense of if it's not one person's responsibility, is it no one's responsibility? So as we think about any form of shared leadership, that how well are these two people going to work together? And so again, flexible, reasonable people that want to see you do good research. Hopefully, they would be happy and willing to work together, but definitely have those conversations and understand their thoughts, their pieces, and how it may look from their perspective. That the other piece is, and again, this is going to vary heavily in institutions. And if you're thinking about approaching more junior faculty, if you're asking a more junior faculty to co-chair with the senior faculty, is someone going to be doing all of the work and then getting relatively little credit for the work they've done? So, and does that credit matter to them? Like, and again, that's going to vary. But so, and again, I feel like I said, it's going to vary. Like, if we were going to run a computer-aided text analysis on this talk, I don't want the takeaway to be, it's going to vary. Like, but I do want it to be awareness just of these broader things of like, okay, yes, it's going to be different for every person on this call, but here are the things that if everybody thought through, hopefully they would come out on the other side with this greater contextual awareness. And the 3 things that we're going to pop for them, okay, it was one of the 30, or 3 of the 30, different 3, but that way people have what they need.
All right, hearty thanks to Dr. Luciano for the time and effort to join and share all of these insights. So really thank you. We really do appreciate it a ton. We're gonna break for about 14 minutes. So whatever time zone you're in, the next top of the hour is when we will restart. So it's noon Eastern time, but whatever time zone you're in, come back at the top of the hour and we'll have a great session from Dr. Allie Gabriel, and I'll hold on any intro until then. So thanks everyone. Thanks Dr. Luciano, and we'll see you all in about 14 minutes.
All right, good afternoon. Can everyone hear me well? Okay, okay, great. All right, welcome back from your break. Hopefully you were able to stretch and be prepared for the final stretch of our session today. Again, I'm Edwina Hill, assistant professor at the University of South Carolina, and I'm excited to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Allison Gabriel. She is the Thomas J. Howitt Chair in Management in the Mitchell E. Daniels Jr. School of Business at Purdue University. She also serves as the faculty director of the Center for Working Well and an associate editor at Journal of Applied Psychology. Her research aims to understand how employees thrive and promote their well-being at work through studying a range of topics, including emotions, emotion regulation, motivation, and experiences unique to women in the workplace. Today, Dr. Gabriel will share with us the lessons that she has learned throughout her academic journey, as well as practical advice to help us navigate our own academic journeys. Thank you so much for being with us today, Allie. Hopefully you've gotten a chance to settle in, and I will turn it over to you and give you the ability, I think, to share your screen and all that stuff. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. Can everyone hear me okay? Yes, I see some nods. I see Ben Rogers giving a thumb up, so that's fantastic for everybody. Okay, let me go ahead, share this. I feel a little rusty presenting. I'll explain why in a second. So I appreciate the grace and the invite. Last year felt like I was very emotional because it felt like my swan song presentation, because I will not be at Academy in person this year. And then when Lauren and Edwina and their collaborators reached out to see if I would participate because it was virtual, I was so excited to have the opportunity to connect with this group, because I may be biased, but I think this is my favorite PDW, because I think the midway, halfway point of your PhD program is such a sweet spot to really think about what it is that you want to do, and also kind of mentally prepare for the wild ride that is the 10-year process. So last year, goodness, what a difference a year makes. Last year, I was a hot, sweaty mess trying to give this presentation. Literally nearly collapsed because I was 10 weeks pregnant and had to announce to a room of about 200 people that I wasn't incredibly nervous to give a presentation. I just was having a lot of hormones. So the reason why I'm a little rusty is because I've been home hanging out for the last 4 months with our newest kiddo. So that's Eleanor, my 5-year-old, and Evelyn, who is 4 months old, and literally as we speak, getting driven by her dad to go get her 4-month vaccine. So thank you for this invite, so I don't have to be there when she screams. And but we love science, it's fine. And so when you're home for 4 months, though, you get to, one, watch a lot of TV, to really reflect on your career. And I will say our first was born the week COVID shut everything down. That was a really weird parental leave. This felt like an actual stop, the way leaves are intended to be a stop, which was delightful. And I knew this was going to be one of the first things I was coming back to. And I was like, well, is my thinking changing in a way that I actually want to change any of these slides? And the answer luckily was no, because I actually don't know if I had it in me to make new PowerPoint slides. And so the advice still holds. Actually, I think this is the first thing I'm doing from my office. So my office is very musty and weird in here. So I might start sweating just because I haven't opened the doors in 4 months. All right, so let's go back in time. So I graduated with my PhD in 2013, which is getting way too distant. My doc students here like to remind me that I went to school in the 2010s, which I think is offensive. But anyway, when I graduated or was getting ready to go on the market, I wasn't particularly told a whole lot. So some context, I am an IO psychologist by training. I went to the University of Akron. I really wasn't told a whole lot. It was just do good research, ask good questions, have a good time. The advice I was given was that, it'd be great to have 1A if you're going to go on the market, but just focus on projects that you're really intrinsically excited about, find people that you really love collaborating with. And I just thought it was a delightful time until I went to my first academy. So my first academy was my job market year at the OB Doctoral Consortium, like the meat market where everybody's sharing CVs and freaking out and trying to figure out who's going to be competing for jobs. And I just remember being in that room being like, what is this? Like, what is happening right now? I had never heard of the Tamuga rankings. I wasn't really aware of journalists. I didn't understand why people were counting the number of A's. It was just really, really eye-opening. So I was incredibly naive. I came back from that experience, panicked to my advisor. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like, there's absolutely no way I'm going to get a job. I still like pull the plug. I'm going to go be a consultant. He was like, no, it's going to be okay. Like, this is just a marathon. And the goal right now is to get a job, right? And then let's think about it down the road, right? So get a job, start somewhere where you feel like it's good. Hopefully that's your forever home. Spoiler alert, it wasn't. I've done 3 moves, but each move was meaningful and important in my career changes. And what I want to do is kind of walk you through how I think about this, because the whole, like, it's like a marathon is very personally meaningful to me because I am somebody who is a marathon runner. I feel like in graduate school, people either got into like some weird baking hobby or they started long distance running or did other things that were less adaptive for their well-being. So I fell in the running bucket. I met my spouse through running. So we're one of those families, unfortunate days for my daughters. And I feel like I could actually sync these marathons that I ran with different life lessons that apply to thinking about not just navigating, you know, who you want to be as a scholar, your job market, but what those first few years feel like on the tenure clock. Because it feels like you have all of this time, and I don't know if this is helpful or not, but you don't. And so I think the more you accept that, like, oh my gosh, like it is just going to feel like this really intense endurance event, the better it will start to feel. So this was my first marathon. Look at that baby Allie. She was so well rested. The first lesson I would recommend to you is you're built for doing hard things. If I have any Peloton friends in the audience, this is like Jess Sims, Lingo 101. I would recommend you're built for doing hard things. And what that means is like really create a plan and stick to it, even when the self-doubt creeps in. Our jobs are very unusual in the sense that I think we have the best jobs in the world. And I am yet to find friends in another field that get as much negative feedback as we get in our jobs. I say this as somebody who just submitted a rejection letter. I'm so sorry, like literally 30 seconds before I hopped on this call. Like, this is just like, it's so inherent. I know, sorry, I should have, timing was terrible if anybody's in here. It's just such an inherent part of our job. And so things are just going to explode. I am somebody who has high anxiety. I like to plan, I like to plot. And I've had to get really good at being like, all right, I need a plan and I need to be ready for things to explode. The papers that I think are going to get an R&R get rejected. The papers I think never have a shot, they get an R&R, right? We can only predict so much. And I think what you need to remind yourself is like, this is a grind in a lot of ways, but I think it's a nerdy, delightful grind. I think there's a lot of joy and fun in it. I'll show you a picture towards the end of this. It exemplifies what I'm talking about. And you need to really remind yourself this, right? It's really hard when you get that draft. I still remember to this day, I'm very close to my PhD advisor, Jim Diefendorf. I can still remember the feeling of getting an email from him with a draft and opening it and it looking like he just murdered my document. To this day, if I write with him, I still get those feelings when he starts editing. I'm like, oh, that feels rough, right? And I think it's a natural tendency we have to kind of shut down and self-protect. But the more you remind yourself, like, no, people put me in this PhD program for a reason. They picked me for a reason. The better you will start to get at this. So that's baby Allie at her first marathon. Here's marathon 2 where my husband and I were obnoxious and we ran one together. Barf. Surround yourself with really good people. And this includes at work and at home. So you really need to find some people in your non-work life who kind of get a sense of what it is that you're doing. I say this as somebody who has like in-laws who to this day still have absolutely no idea what I do, but they just know I have a lot of fun and I have to move around the country to do the job. That's about what they know. And they're just relieved that now we're like 5 hours from where they live. I was lucky that Mike was a lecturer in math. And so he had a pretty good understanding, having an applied math master's, of what this was going to look like. We got engaged right before I sat for comps. which that was the running joke, is like, if you chose to get engaged to me then, we would be totally fine. And you want people who are on your side, because there is a lot of sacrifice to do this job well, right? I'm here. I just told you I have a 4-month-old baby. I do not want to give any pretense that I like am some super mom doing it all. Mike stays home full time. So we made the decision that he was going to exit his career so I could keep mine. And so everything that I'm able to do now is 100% a function of the sacrifices that he is making and that our friends have made in our circle to keep supporting us and be extra hands, particularly over the last 4 or 5 months as we've adjusted out of a very hard pregnancy into having a baby. At work, again, we're all getting rejected. Think about being on a plane when you're in a lot of turbulence. We all have one friend that we would like to be sitting next to who's going to be really calm and chill. And we have the other friend who's going to start screaming, right? You want to be next to the friends who are going to be chill, who are just going to be steady. You want those people to help you. So when things go awry, you have folks in your corner who are able to kind of pull you back in and say, hey, it is going to be fine. Like my person for this is Chris Rosen. He's a faculty member at University of Arkansas. And to this day, if one of us has something haywire going on at work, we are calling the other person and being like, I need 5. Like, I need to talk this out. Tell me I'm not crazy, or tell me I am. And sometimes we literally will tell each other like, no, you are crazy, but here's what we're going to do. It's going to be okay. So you want to find folks where you can have those authentic conversations to get the support that you actually need. Lesson number 3, you're not always going to be prepared. So I made the asinine decision to run a marathon while I was on the job market. So this was the Marine Corps marathon in 2012 with a sick Instagram filter, because I went to school in the 2010s. And I ran this marathon like severely undertrained. I think I did like 1 long run and was like close enough. Worst experience of my entire life. It was also when Superstorm Sandy ripped through the East Coast. And so I like ran in a hurricane. And the job market was absolutely bananas. And as prepared as I was not prepared at all for what the job market was going to be like. A job I really, really loved, that I swore I was getting the offer from, because folks there assured me I was getting the offer the day they were supposed to call and make me the job offer. They canceled the job search. That's what the call was. So I thought I was getting a job offer, and instead they were telling me the search had to get shut down. Wild stuff can happen, okay? And I had to do a lot of recalibrating there to be like, okay, big picture, like I have another job offer. This is okay. I had a great experience where I started. And I think the same thing goes for other things, right? Really painful paper rejections. I got a paper I really loved and worked really hard on, rejected while I was like 2 months postpartum. And I had to, even then, as I'm holding this like cute, squishy baby, had to do some recalibrating, being like, all right, this baby's better than another JP, like she is. But like even then, my brain, I had to tell myself like, hey girl, it's going to be okay. With that said, I think this also then feeds into thinking about your career in terms of your values and finding places that fit you holistically and what it is that you want people to be talking about when you're going up for tenure, when you're getting promoted for full. So can you find a place that really values you and what it is that you bring to the table beyond just the number of A publications you have or the number of awards that you win? I've sat through P&T cases here at Purdue, and something that I really love is there's often the scholarly conversation and then a really deep conversation about what the person means to the institution, what that person means to the culture of our OBHR department, to the Daniel School, to the West Lafayette community. And I think that speaks to the values that we place on people, doing their job well and being really good humans. And that's not the place everywhere. I feel really lucky that I'm somewhere where that is what's happening. So just keep that in mind. What kind of conversations do you want said about you? On the other side, you could be really prepared, but still explode. So I ran the New York City Marathon in 2013. I was a freshly minted assistant professor. I trained my butt off, and I had the worst race experience that I have ever had, like just absolutely terrible. I was completely shocked. And so even when things are chugging along, they might not be going according to plan. The most salient example I have of this is the summer before I submitted my tenure packet. This is back when I was at the University of Arizona. I had 3 revisions at AMJ, and all 3 were rejected in about a 6-week span. Like literally it was like every 2 weeks, another one was getting rejected. It was horrific. Like I don't want to pretend like I was like, oh, this is chill, like NBD, I'm fine. Like it was a mess. Like I was crying a lot, and just all over the place. Because one, these things can be soul sucking, like on a good day, right? And some of them were a surprise. And one was not a surprise, but one of them really, really was. I was like, I thought we had it, and it was terrible. I wanted to withdraw my packet. I felt like a total failure. But I had a lot of support from people where I was working at Arizona saying, no. Like, we're still doing this. Like, we got you. You're in good shape. Like, we are going to get this done. We're going to get you to the finish line. Same thing here. Like, that's my dad with me in this picture. Horrible race. And he was like, no, we're going to make it to the end. Even though I landed in the medic tent, like, we're going to get to the finish. It's fine. I was fine. I was just dehydrated. And so you want to surround yourself with people who are going to bet on you time and time again. Like my colleagues at Arizona, they bet on me that this was a blip, right? That, okay, these rejections suck, and we're pretty confident that you're going to be okay. Since then, those 3 papers, one is living in a sad file drawer because none of us quite know what to do with it, but one ended up at JP and one ended up at Org Science. That's a pretty good day, right? And if I had just really sat on the side and been like, absolutely not, this is over, those papers would probably still be sitting in a file drawer, right? So again, surround yourself with people who want to pull you up and really want to take a bet on you, that you have this and that you're going to do it. Right now, in this current moment, I hope it's your dissertation chair or who you think is going to be your dissertation chair, depending on where you are in the program. One day, you're going to have to do this alone, I think is lesson number 5. And I think this is the most horrifying lesson of all of them, because you're right now in the doctoral program, you're in like the little cocoon, right, of your lovely program, and you have your advisor and the people in your cohort or around the halls to go run and ask questions to. And then all of a sudden you get a job and you're sitting at the table and a doc student is sitting on the other side of you asking you for answers. Terrifying. That was Andrew Bennett. To this day, I tell him I'm very, very grateful that he let me kind of test tube like all these things on him, because I was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but we're going to figure it out together. So fittingly, I ran the Richmond Marathon solo when I took my first job, which was at VCU. And it was kind of it was very symbolic for where I was at this stage in my career. Like I really was starting to learn how to do this separate from Jim. I had a really hard time separating from him, not because I couldn't do it, but largely because we worked together really well. We wrote together really well. We were close, and it felt really painful to have to take away that trusted person for a period of time. But I started to figure it out of how to tackle publishing and teaching in my own ways. I found the right co-authors, Chris Rosen. We met because we're both alums of Akron, and we connected at a conference. And I started being really intentional then with seeking people out who wanted to do work the way I was. And I think the biggest pivot of doing it alone was back around 2017, 18 or so, when I decided I wanted to start studying women's health. I got a lot of pushback for this. I was told at Academy that this isn't a management topic. Like, this is cute, but studying breastfeeding work's not a management topic. Or that I was doing this research to just like make a splash and like say words that make people uncomfortable. And one went on to win Best Paper Awards. One went on to be published in the AMJ, I should say. One Best Paper Award from the OB division and from PsyOp. They're over here. And the receipts are behind me. And the other one won the award from the HR division. And I thought that was a really helpful moment of trusting my gut and being like, wait a second, like I'm paving my own path. I am doing my own thing. And I do think the field is opening up more to ideas that can be uniquely you and timely and practically meaningful versus maybe what's typical or what's safe. And so I'd encourage you to really think about this, right? What are the scholarly questions you care deeply about? There can be some strategy to when you decide to do these. You know, I started this right when my tenure packet was submitted, but I do think there's value in the more you study things that you care about and you believe it, and it's not just another paper, where you're just extending the literature with a new moderator because you read it as a limitation in another paper, like the more you believe it and you buy it, the more fun it's going to be, right? Because then you get to talk about what you really care about to people, and you get to align all parts of your job, then your research and your values and your teaching and so forth. And eventually you're going to get through to the other side, and you're going to get to kind of put yourself first and what it is that you want to do. And so after that last marathon I ran in 2014, I really stepped back until 2018, until I felt physically and mentally ready to run a marathon again. I had this mantra where whenever I would run a marathon, I would dedicate each mile to somebody who supported me. And in 2018, this is when I was waiting my tenure decision, I kind of dedicated every mile to me, which sounds very ego driven, but I took the time for 26 times to really think about the hard work I'd put in my career and in my relationships and my cats, like everybody at the time, and really treated it as a 4-hour like victory lap, essentially. I probably could have found more fun things to do after 4 hours, but that's what I decided to do. And then same thing, after I got tenure, I really took a step back. I remember I got the letter. I was like, cool, guys, thanks so much. I'll see you in August, which is not my style. I was always around. But I taught in Europe for 5 weeks. I came home. We went backpacking in Glacier and National Park, which is amazing. We should all live in Montana. And I just remember like taking a step back and being like, okay, I'm gonna start putting like really what I want first. Like I delayed having kids. I listened to all the tenure advice that women are given of like, don't have kids before you get tenure. It'll ruin everything. To this day, I remember somebody told me when I was getting ready to have my first, that it was so good that I was having my first after tenure, since all of my productivity was going to decline. Like literally people say crazy stuff. Bullshit. Am I allowed to say this in an academy recording? I guess I already did. I don't know why I'm asking for permission. So it was a nice moment though to be like, I'm gonna do this job my way. I'm gonna prioritize my family and figure out how to be productive. Eleanor arrived 2.5 years later, and then Evelyn obviously is here now. And honestly, and again, please don't look at my CV and be like, wow, having kids made you more productive. No, you get better at the job, but also it's been a lot of intentional building infrastructure around it to do this well. I rest a lot better now, which is something I'm still working on. I have found co-authors where we really build each other up and we complement each other in terms of having complementary skills. We share the same goals and values. We're doing work that's really empirically and practically meaningful to us and still rigorous. And so does that mean I'm still working on Saturdays sometimes? Yeah, because I'm a nerd. And if I'm like, hey, the kids are all napping and I have a couple hours to kill, I might pick up an article to read it because I think that's really fun, right? And I think that comes with a lot of intentionality that I started planting the seeds of when I was a doc student and really embraced the longer I've gone into this career, which is actually 12 years now. And last thing I want to remind you, again, if it's not a theme that's already emerging out, it's really about the people and not the pubs. And I feel really lucky that over the years, these worlds have gotten, I think there's risks to boundary blurring, but when it goes well, it really, really goes well. So I feel fortunate that the top left corner, that's Jim Dievendorf, me, of course, and then that's Nithya Chava, who's my first doc student in Arizona. She's now a faculty member at Minnesota, just crushing it. And then Alicia Grandi, who's my undergrad advisor at Penn State. So I have like a complete academic family in the field. Down the bottom, that's Chris Rosen. He and his family drove to Tucson in the pandemic to like come to Tucson and meet our kid. Like that's a pretty good, that's not just a co-author at that point. Eleanor was so small then. You can see above, that's Christy Rogers and Nithya again, all of our kids together at the zoo. And then these last two pictures literally just happened in the last few days. So the top one is via Kate Zapay at 9 p.m. on a Thursday at a Starbucks that kicked us out, submitting what we think is going to become the paper that we are like most proud of, that somehow we wrote while was on leave. To this day, we're like, we have no idea how we wrote this because I like made a human and had a human and she was busy teaching, but we did it. And it was just such a joyful moment. And on the bottom are some of our doctoral students here, Mujo and Matthew Sherman and Sally Hedrick, who I lost power on Saturday. I was like, I guess I'm going to go work. And I messaged a bunch of our students being like, I'm going to be at this coffee shop on campus. I'll buy you a coffee if you're around. And then have quickly follow with, sorry, not that person. It's Saturday. You don't need to work today. Please live your life. And then they ended up showing up anyway. And we're like, actually, like, we kind of were working. We just want some community. And I think that's really special. And I just feel really grateful that, you know, I didn't get it right at first, and it's taken a few steps and fumbles, but I've really settled into a place that feels good, that aligns with all the things that I want to be doing. And I'm just really grateful for the opportunity to be here with you all virtually. You will see me back in action next year. Hopefully less sweaty. It is so clammy in this office. So maybe I'll come back next year. I'll have my fan. Edwina, I bought one. It used to be in my office after you bailed me out last year. I bought my own, and I used to do exec ed holding that. I'd be like, this is my Bay fan, and I need this.
I love
That's
that.
all I have. That's my QR code to a LinkedIn if you would like to reach out or keep in touch. If you send me an email this summer, I apologize. I'll be very slow to respond because I have a really squishy baby at home and we hang out and do fun things. So, but thank you all for having me. I'm so glad you all attended this day. This session is so important. And yeah, if you're going to Copenhagen, have a safe trip. That's it.
Thank you so much, Allie. As always, we appreciate you sharing your time with us. And most of all, we appreciate your vulnerability and sharing the lessons that you've learned and practical advice that we can use along our academic journey. So now we are going to open the floor for questions. And we'll do just like we did with our other speakers. You can either raise your Zoom hand and I'll call on you, and then you can unmute and ask your question, or if you prefer, you can just drop your question in the chat and I will read it on your behalf. So the floor is yours. Okay, if we don't have a question right away, I have a question prepared from the questions that you all submitted in your registration surveys. So a question that was pretty popular or something similar, what advice do you have for mid-stage students who are beginning to think about the job market? So it feels like it's kind of early or it feels far off, but they're at the stage of launching what is the beginning or the foundation of their academic career. What should they be thinking about right now?
Yeah. I can tell you one thing you should not be thinking about, and it's that Google Doc. So shut it down. I know you all have it on your computers. Delete it. It is not going to help you. It is a cesspool, and it is the worst thing that has ever been created. So I really would encourage you to take that off. Where you could spend your time instead, I think a couple of things. One, start thinking about dissertations and how those fit with the identity that you want to craft on the job market. So I think this is a great time to really start thoughtfully asking yourself who it is that you want to be on the job market. What is when people think about you or see your packet? Oh, hi, Mia. Oh, I just put your picture in my PowerPoint. I should have asked for your consent. It was fun. Mia just passed prelims, so we were also celebrating Mia passing prelims here at Purdue. But I think, when people see you or get to know you, like, what do they want to know you for, right? So I think my first time out, I was known as the girl studying emotional labor and doing really weird stuff with methods. Like, I'm pretty sure that was it. And that was pretty accurate, but not the best identity, right? That's not clear. It read very IO at the time, which I think restricted the schools interested in me. So dissertation and identity, these are good conversations to be thinking about. I also don't think it's too early to kind of visualize your dream job talk, right? So what is it that you want to be able to get up and share with people, say about the kind of work that you're doing? And so that means thinking about the research pipeline you currently have, right? So what projects are moving? What stages are they at? If you want, most people present their dissertations, right? So when can you get to that data to have something cool to share? Like my job talk, I think I had 5 participants. So a lot of my job talk was like, I know this isn't much, but just go with me on this, which is a rough thing to have to say in a job talk with like very critical people. It's like, just go with me. This will be fine. And then the other thing, I like doing a lot of intentional planning of, again, thinking about your pipeline and the types of people you want to work with. So really, like, this should be something you kind of check out each semester. I still do this each semester, like a project audit and who I'm working with and which projects are exciting me and which people am I excited to work with. You want those to overlap. right? And really think about that pretty strategically. And I would say it's not too bad to also start thinking about, like, where do you want to live? Now, as people, you will get a lot of advice on this, okay? There are challenges with doing restricted job searches. I say this as somebody who, the third time I went out, it was a very restricted job search. Like, I reached out to 2 schools as a senior faculty member. I interviewed at those 2 schools, right? Don't recommend doing that your first time out, right? You want to think pretty broadly about what types of schools are you open to? What types of people do you want to be working with? And try to decouple as much as you can. Like, I think we get really hung up on like status and prestige cues and paying less attention to who the people actually are at the place you're about to work at. So really thinking about who are the types of colleagues you want to have. Are you someone who wants to drop in somewhere and have collaborators down the hall? That should be something you're thinking about right now. Are you somebody who doesn't really care and you're fine being on an island, or you want to be somewhere where everybody's pretty divergent? That's going to be a different looking place. So yeah, these are all, I don't know if this is helpful, but these are all the broad things I started thinking about around like year 3-ish, 4. And these are the things that I coach my students to start thinking through too around that time as well. But get off the Google Doc. I know one of you right now has it open on a tab in your Google Chrome.
Thank you for that very practical piece of advice.
It's terrible.
Stay off. So another question that we got in the registration was around this idea of sort of being at the stage where you've just finished your coursework. Most people have already completed comps or they're preparing to do so. And so now you're moving into this space of unstructured time. And like, what are your tips or maybe some pitfalls to think about? Like, how do you maximize on this time as you think about dissertation and, you know, the road ahead?
Yes, and I actually was just talking about that with Mia and the other students on Saturday when I did not force them to work. They all willingly came. So I think the hardest years of the PhD program are the first year when you have all your classes and you have absolutely no idea what the hell is going on. And then your third year, or whatever the year is after your prelims or comps, whatever you want to call them, and all of a sudden all of your classes are gone and you are just in this like autonomy abyss where you're like, what is all this free time, right? And I actually remember having that feeling. The way it worked at Akron is our comps were actually the end of our third year, which made your fourth year like very panicked and important because you had to come right out of comps and roll right into your dissertation, like instantly. Like it was not my favorite. And I remember I feel like I was like floating out to sea for like 4 or 5 weeks. And then I like went to Jim's office. It was like, dude, you gotta reel me in. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm just like reading and just, I feel like I'm like thoughtless here in terms of how I'm approaching my time. And so I think it helps if you get the opportunity to teach. That starts to build some natural structure. But this is around the time I started figuring out how I wanted to use my days and when I was good at doing certain things during the day. So I'm somebody, for instance, that like if I'm going to write or read or now like review, write a decision letter, that's really got to happen for me between like 7:30 in the morning and like 1. Like that's my prime writing time. After that, like it's just not the vibe. Like I'm not feeling it, but I've learned like I can do data analysis endlessly, like all night long. Like so if I have to run analyses, that stuff all lives in the afternoons for me. I know that's not everybody's style. Like some people like multitasking and switching through lots of different stuff, but that's when I started really kind of doing time audits because I'm a nerd and I study like motivation and time. And I was like, these are my prime time. So I would block my calendar then and kind of start to set up a schedule each week. Okay, like Monday, I am working on getting I remember my affect and fit paper out to PSYCH. In the afternoon, then I'm starting to run the pilot analyses on my grant data. The next day, I'm going to start reading for this next paper. I'm going to still work on these analyses for the right. And I just kept stacking my time in that way. And it felt really good. I think when those skills become really important when you become a faculty member and everybody wants your time to do different stuff. So you are actually, I know you all feel busy. And what I'm about to say sounds really insulting, but you're not. It's it's like cute, busy in grad school. And then once you become a faculty, you get pulled by so many different entities. And sometimes your department has a really good understanding of what you're getting pulled by because they're doing the pulling. But then you start getting onto editorial review boards, you start doing service for the academy. All of a sudden, there's all these extra things. So to this day, I will like block on my calendar so people can't get me. Like, Allie is writing from like 8 a.m. till 1 today, and it is blocked out. Like, and for somebody to take a meeting time in there, they have to like pry it from my hands. Like, it actually has to be like a really good reason why it's getting interrupted. And that's what really worked for me. But like, figure out how to build structure. I think the other thing is figure out how to build community. I think after comps, it can get really lonely because you've just gone through 2 really intense years with people in classes. And then all of a sudden you're like overnight bump to senior student, right? Doctoral candidate student. And that's really cool. But that means some of your crew is still in class and prelims mode, right? That's very, very different. So find your community of folks, find people who like to go to coffee shops and want to do writing dates and structure with you. I think those things are really, really helpful. And the last thing is know that time is going to go really, really fast. Like, it's just going to go really, really fast. So a 4th year seems like this limitless year where you're like, or 3rd year, and you're like, I have all this time, and it's just going to go so fast. So prepare for that.
Excellent. Okay, looks like we have a question in the chat from Maylene. She asks, you mentioned being told that a particular line of research wasn't seen as a fruitful endeavor. As a student or early career scholar, it can be hard to balance advice from more experienced researchers with our own instincts and interests. How do you navigate trusting your intuition when you're drawn to something that others might dismiss? Thank you, Maylene.
Oh, yeah, this is such a good question. And it's so complicated. And to be honest, I feel like I still grapple with this as I kind of update and evolve like my own interests and thinking. So I don't know if I have a good answer, but let me tell you what I tell my students. So maybe that's the best way I can answer it, right? Because naturally, I have doctoral students coming into the program who have interests tied to women's health, gender related issues, harassment, discrimination, and so forth. You can imagine a world where it feels high risk to go on the job market with a dissertation where you're about to say the word like menstruation 50 times to a room, right? If that's what you're doing, if you're doing some women's health topic. There's 2 ways to view that. One is you're going to weed out the jobs real fast. And what I mean by that is you are going to identify the groups that are supportive of the type of scholarship that you care about. So a great example of this was Nithya Chava. Again, she was my first doc student in Arizona. And she wanted, actually, the fact that I let her do this, I say let, so she's not like a grown woman who can make her own choices. The fact that I agreed that this is a good idea, where she was like, I would like to study hostile and benevolent sexism. And I was like, great. And she's like, I would like to study it on the job market. And I was like, so you're going to go into a job talk and you're going to set the stage. You're going to talk about hostile and benevolent sexism as a minority woman in your own job talk while you were searching for a job. And she was like, yes. And I was like, 10 out of 10. Like, let's do it. Like, this is going to be rough. Like, you got to do it. You got to own this. And that was a big part of it. I was like, if you're going to do this, you've got to own it. There's no tiptoeing around it. There's no like humming and hawing over whether you believe this. Like, you've got to go all in. And it basically did exactly what I thought it was going to, which is the schools that thought it was nonsense told her it was nonsense. And they did. A couple schools literally told her at Academy, like, this is nonsense. This is not a real thing. And then the schools that bought it and saw value were the ones who interviewed her, right? And so I think if you're willing to accept that, then it's okay to take on some of these riskier topics, but just understand that that is going to be a natural part of the process. The other thing to think about, though, when thinking about trickier topics like this is you want to think about what it's an example of, right? So studying women's health, fine. But what is it maybe an extreme context of that's a bigger part of your identity, right? So I talk about, navigating complex issues at the work, non-work interface. And so part of my work does more classic recovery-based research. which I laugh that that's now called SAFE, right? Back when I was a doc student, that was like, it was like feelings research. Like, you want to talk about feelings, like that's risky. But now that's like the SAFE thing. And then I also have this pocket on like motherhood, pregnancy, women's health, right? So it fits within this larger identity bucket, because the risk I think you have with doing what some might call like niche, if you will, like a niche topic, is that you're viewed as being really narrow. And with narrowness comes a risk of other things like not getting tenure, right? Because most schools, most good programs, I know it doesn't feel like it all the time, most places hire rookies because they would like to tenure you. And I know it doesn't always feel that way, but at the end of the day, like when we are hiring a rookie and assistant professor, and I've sat on a ton of hiring committees at 3 different institutions, our goal is to tenure people. We do not want to bring you here and invest in you and have you become part of our community to, after 5 or 6 years, be like, all right, well, that was sick, but you can exit now, right? That's not the goal. And so with narrowness comes increased risk that you're going to be able to get the record that you need. In terms of trusting your own instincts, again, you want to get multiple perspectives. And I think there's a difference here between being told the topic is not great versus being told the frame or the contribution isn't great, right? So you want to be more concerned about the latter, right? Because I think there's actually very few topics now where people will be like, oh, that topic's not important, right? We might agree that it's important, but I think if you're getting a lot of feedback, Aileen and others, like, oh, okay, really important topic, but I'm not sure the contribution is living up to what you want it to be. Like, we need to work harder to figure out, like, for instance, I have a paper looking at IVF and infertility right now. And it's taking a long time for us to really figure out, like, what is the story beyond just studying IVF, right? What is the theoretical frame? What is the conversation? So if you're getting more comments about, hey, really good topic, but I don't think the framing is doing what you want, I would listen a lot more to that, because I think that's where folks are trying to help you translate those things out. The last piece I'll say, and I gave this advice to Nithya as well when she said she wanted to do this dissertation, I was like, okay, we need to balance you out then. So all my students, we talk about, like, we have like the safe topics they do, and then we have the riskier projects, right? And we kind of balance it out because you just don't know which things are going to get traction when. And so the last thing I want to do as an advisor is stack students with all projects that I think carry risk in terms of reviewer reactions, traction, and so forth. So again, this goes back to something I said earlier. This is a great time to really balance your CV out and say, okay, which of these are moving, which feel good, and then where can I take risk? And the longer you're at this, the more risk you get to start taking. So I have very long answers to these questions, but it's such a good question. It's such a balance. But I do think things are evolving in a really positive way. I think sessions like this, the things the OB division are doing are facilitating that. So again, try to disentangle, hey, I'm getting feedback. Like I said, I hope most people are not giving feedback like, oh, like, why are you studying motherhood, right? Like, that used to be a thing though. Like, why are you studying this? And now it's more like, oh, okay, infertility, that's really important. I don't think what you're doing though is a theoretical contribution. It just looks like you have a new stressor in front of a stressor model, and that's fair feedback, right? That's the kind of stuff you want to start listening to.
Thank you so much, Allie. That was great. And I know everyone got a lot from all the insights you shared. And thank you for your really thoughtful answer to that last question. I think that's such an important point of understanding as a student how to parse out a critique about what you're studying versus how you're studying it. So thank you so much. And thank you as always for sharing your time with us, especially at this moment. We're honored to be your first stop back. So thank you. And we hope
if you want to see my baby,
in.
She's going for her vaccines right now.
Oh, that's
She's literally
the pre-photo.
She won't be smiling soon. Poor baby.
Oh.
It's fine. Her legs are really fat now, so she'll feel there's a lot to work with.
Oh, well, happy we could provide a little distraction for you as well. So thank you again.
Yes,
all
thank
right.
you so much, and enjoy Academy, everybody. Safe travels.
Thanks. All right, so on behalf of my co-organizers, again, we appreciate all of the esteemed speakers that we had here today sharing their time and their insights with us. Of course, we also appreciate all of you, the students who registered and attended today. As we're closing, I just want to, or we all want to encourage you to reflect on the wisdom and the practical advice that you heard here today, and to consider how you will incorporate these insights into your own academic journey and your plans as you move forward in your PhD programs. So before we wrap up, we have a couple of announcements. So first, we have more information about the in-person Halfway There networking event at AOM. So due to the overwhelming demand from you all, we've been working on a solution so that we could accommodate more people. And I am happy to announce that we were able to secure a larger venue. So we're able to accommodate more than the 30 people that we originally stated in the registration survey. So we're still working out the final details, but at this point, we know that the in-person networking event will take place on Tuesday, July 29th. The time is to be determined, and it will be hosted at the Bella Center in Copenhagen. And so we'll follow up with you with more information a little bit closer to that date and time. So that's for those of you who will be in Copenhagen for AOM. And then our second reminder is about the next part of your virtual Halfway There experience. And so that next part is our regional sessions. And so over the next 2 days, we're hosting 3 regional sessions. Each session will include panelists from that region who will answer questions about attaining success in the second half of your PhD program. And then following each panel, we'll have roundtable sessions hosted by the panelists from that region, as well as other recent graduates from that region. So we have the dates and times listed there, and we've listed the times according to a centralized location in each of the different regions using based on that time zone. And so in the Central Hemisphere session, we'll include panelists and roundtable hosts from schools in the Netherlands, England, Italy, France, Ireland, and Turkey. The Eastern Hemisphere session will include panelists and roundtable hosts from schools in Korea, China, Australia, and Singapore. And then the Western Hemisphere session will include panelists and roundtable hosts from the US and Canada. So if you have any questions about how you should be navigating that experience, please reach out to us. I believe you will receive a link according to whatever regional sessions you registered for in the registration survey. And so we'll have additional links for that coming out to you. And so again, if you have any questions, please let us know. We're happy to help. And I think that is all. Lauren, Ben, is there anything else we need to cover? Okay, yep, thank you. We also have our survey that we would ask you to complete. We hope that you all will be able to attend at least one of the regional sessions. And so if you would like to wait until after you've completed the entire experience and actually gone through the regional session, that will be great. You can complete it then. And so this is the link. The QR code should also take you to the same website. And so this is where you can share feedback with us about this virtual experience. As Lauren mentioned, this is our first time organizing Halfway There in this fashion. And so we'd really like your feedback about what worked well and what you'd like to see maybe differently in the future. All right, I think that was everything. Excuse me, starting to lose my voice. All right, well, thank you all for joining us today, and we hope that you have a good rest of your day, and we look forward to seeing you at one or more of the regional sessions this week. All right, take care.